All right, everybody. We are live. We are live. I'm here in Austin, Texas. I've got my good buddy Ben Rubenstein here with me, and we're going to have a great stream here. It's going to be absolutely awesome. It's going to be great. We're just going to get things going on all platforms. Make sure we're going live on Rockfin. We are on Rockfin, by the way, and we will soon be. Soon be on a lot more different platforms. We're live on YouTube and we're live on Rockfin. And actually, he's in a little bit of a hurry, so we'll just jump right into it. We have a very special guest with us. He was a special guest this weekend at our conference for the Center for Political Innovation. And since we're just starting out here, I guess we'll play the intro music and then we'll bring on our guest, Jackson Hinkle. So we'll have the intro music and then we'll have Jackson.
The century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right, so now our special guest, the great Jackson Hinkle. How are you?
Hey, Jackson.
How's it going, you guys?
Great.
Not bad.
Yeah, we're here in Austin, Texas, and you're getting ready to head out of town, right?
Yeah, how's my connection?
Oh, it's great. We can hear you just fine. Can you hear us?
Okay. Yeah, I can. It was a little bit choppy in the intro, but look at where I am right now. I'm sitting outside the old Austin power plant. You can't really see it, but there's like the 3 pillars up.
Oh, you froze there for just a minute. Can you still hear us, Jackson? You're above the power plant, and then you froze.
Oh, that's what.
Oh, you're back. Can you hear us now, Jackson?
There
you go. So
If that keeps happening, I might have to move around and find a better spot. But we'll
sure. So I guess we can start out. Do you want to just kind of give us your reaction to the conference?
Yeah. I thought it was incredible. Thank you so much for putting it all together. I was first and foremost just shocked at the amount of people that were there. And I think a lot of people probably were, because, in the past we've done things like force the vote. We've done things, like the Capitol Steps protests with this similar vein of, people who are organizing around these issues. And it's always few and far between the individuals that actually show up to these events. But I was thinking, like, geez, like Austin, Texas, like, really, how many people are we going to get at this event? Like, I don't know. Maybe we fill the room. I don't know. And then we all walked in as security escorted us in. And it was a full room. There was no empty seats. It was incredible. And that was the first shocking thing. And it was really beautiful to see that. And then I think the other, we can talk about like details and stuff, but the other really big thing for me was there was a guy there who he was on the premises of the event, we'll say, and he was a diehard Trump consultant. He happened to be listening to our event and everything that the speakers had to say, and he was born and raised in Texas. And he at the breakaway point, like halfway through, he came up to me and we.
Oh, you froze again there, Jackson. You froze, but you were telling us. Can you hear us?
I'm going to try to walk around and find it better.
Yeah. You were telling us about the guy who came up to you at the halfway break of the event.
Well, I think he said he was a Trump supporter.
Right. It was a Trump supporter who came up to him at the halfway break of the event. It was a guy who just happened to be around the hotel, is what he was saying. Oh, he's moving to a different spot where he'll have better reception.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah. So what happened? The Trump supporter walked up to you?
Connection's a little bit bad here.
Sure, sure.
Let me move over a little bit.
Sure,
This area,
sure.
I think there's probably better connection over here.
Sure thing.
Anyways, you can hear me now, so I'll
Sure.
just
We can
finish
hear
this
you.
part of the story.
There you are.
It was really interesting because we were sitting there and we were just like having lunch and stuff. And he said, I'm a diehard Trump conservative, born and raised in this country. I'm a patriot. But he's like, I don't really know what the specific labels are of your group that is speaking today. But he said, I've never seen anything like it. He's like, I don't agree with everything that's been said here, but you guys are really winning me over with this message and you're resonating with me. And I think the most important thing that I've probably heard him say was like, I don't know. He said, I don't know. I just feel like I can trust you guys. I don't trust these politicians. We've done political events before. I feel like I can trust you guys.
Wow.
I thought that was really cool.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
That is really great. Yeah, the weekend all just had this really positive vibe. Everyone who was there, I mean, it seemed like, like a place that people belong, I mean, there wasn't a moment that was uncomfortable, I didn't think.
No. And, all the speakers were great. The speeches were great. Everyone kind of brought something different to the table, which was really cool. And yeah, I felt like it was a very defining moment in this current climate, in this current era, that I feel like hasn't been really done yet. And I feel like it's going to set the course for, the future of like our current of politics, which really hasn't been represented by any wing of like a coherent political body in the United States for decades. So I thought it was really cool. And I really liked Hawes's speech. I like your speech. I can't wait till the videos get uploaded for everyone to see.
Yeah, your presentation was great. You talked about Ukraine and the 2004 Orange Revolution and everything that led up to where we are right now. And it was really important because if you watch CNN, you would think this all just started a couple weeks ago. That Putin was having a bad day or was mentally ill and just decided he wanted to roll into Ukraine. And you gave the background that no one is getting on this. Do you want to reflect on some of what was in your remarks and why it's important for people to hear?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for people to understand the full context of Ukraine and Russia because I will say, like, most Americans do have like a distrust of government and the media, but the fog of war is so thick surrounding this very topic that I think, despite the general instinct of most Americans to not trust what's being fed to them by the likes of Pelosi and George Soros and Chuck Schumer and Adam Schiff and all the others, who run this country and the deep state that, governs foreign policy here. I believe the fog of war is really so thick that a lot of people have fallen for this. Now, fortunately, the very people who would fight in a conventional war and participate in a conventional war with Ukraine, specifically, it's lower class, non-college educated men are pretty much opposed to U.S. military intervention in Ukraine right now, which is good. So there are some people who are saying no to this. But at the end of the day, there's still a lot of misinformation with the fly zones, all this stuff. With the speech I did, I wanted to paint a clear picture as to how this all started. The war did not start this month. You guys know that. We all know that. The war started after a U.S. coup in Ukraine in 2014. I even talked back in 2004 with regard to the Orange Revolution, which was the first color revolution in Ukraine. And, that color revolution was nowhere near as big of an overhaul as we saw in 2014. And in 2014, with that massive bloody overhaul of the democratically elected government, you saw resistance, popular resistance movements in Donetsk and Luhansk in the Donbass and in Odessa. And in other areas of Ukraine, but those were the main ones. And those were the main ones that the government and the military, specifically, and these ultranationalists and neo-Nazi militias, were tapped to basically stifle. And they did that through bloody means. They did that through slaughtering innocent people, peaceful people. And that's what we've witnessed over the past 8 years in Donetsk and Luhansk. You saw, the U.S. and the U.K. and the Ukrainian governments funding and arming ultra-nationalists and neo-Nazi militias and arms of the Ukrainian military to slaughter these resistance groups and rebel groups who, in Donetsk and Luhansk specifically, were trying to break away and form their own people's republics, which they have now done. 14,000 people died in the fighting over the past 8 years. And I hesitate to call it just a war. It was asymmetric war. Most of the heavy artillery was, brought in from the side of Ukraine, given to the likes of the Azov Battalion. 81% of the civilians who died in this conflict died on the side of, 81% of the civilian casualties in the past 3 years were on the side of Donetsk and Luhansk. So it really was an asymmetric war. And anyone who tries to paint what has happened over the past month with Ukraine and Russia as like a new beginning rather than a continuation of a 8-year conflict is painting a revisionist history. And I thought it was important to do that. And people will hear all the details in the speech, but mainly it's important to do that because it's important to show how Russia has been engaging diplomatically with the West for these past 8 years as they move into the age of multipolarity, recognizing a public referendum in Crimea in 2014 to join the Russian Federation, for example, trying to get all political parties to adhere to the Minsk agreement. Putin was very, very restrained in his response to the aggression by Ukraine and NATO-aligned powers over these past 8 years. And it is just now that we see him kind of lay down the hammer, so to speak. And I wish it didn't have to be this way, but that's what you do. You can't treat Russia like they are a small state power that can be walked over, like the United States has done to Syria and Libya and Iran and Venezuela and so many other countries.
Sure, absolutely. Now, we had heavy security at the conference, and they seemed to do their job pretty well. They removed the potential disruptors and such. But do you want to talk about kind of the atmosphere, how we had to kind of like be, kind of sneak in almost, how they rushed us in from the place we were waiting and stuff. I mean, with the Red Guards, and now there's this video by this crazy person who was there with the purple makeup and all of that. What do you think of that?
Yeah. I mean, thank God we had security there. I was really worried. I saw these Red Guard and these Austin DSA types posting on, and you saw it, and that's why, the security was hired, but saw them posting on like Twitter and stuff the week leading up to the events, the CPI event, and saying stuff like, well, I'm not even joking, you guys. They do like horrific things. Like they, sure, you can have political disagreements with people, but they have political disagreements with people like pro-life protesters. And they go to their protests or their gatherings, their political gatherings, and throw smoke bombs at them. Like, it's insane what they do. And they said, well, if we could throw smoke bombs at pregnant women who are pro-life protesting, imagine what we're going to do to CPI. So, it's crazy. And thank God that, again, they were there because there were people who were removed. It looked like there was just like 1 or 2 people in there who kind of managed to blend in with the crowd, and they filmed stuff. And I guess that was the worst that they did, was film stuff and post it. Sure. But it could have been a lot worse. It could, and we had to like sneak in secretly. It was a very professional, security coverage, and I'm thankful for it.
Yeah. Well, I really hope you'll join us at the next one. We're looking to do this in mid-May in Chicago. So I hope you can be there for that in a little bit. That's our hope. It was a really successful weekend. We really appreciate your remarks. I mean, your talk was tremendous, by the way. Just a really good overall history and critique of the left and everything we needed to hear. So thank you very much. And I know you got a flight to catch, so we won't keep you too much longer. But do you want to add anything before you go?
I hope as many people as possible come out to the Chicago event in May. Pending, schedule stuff, like I'll definitely be there. And I look forward to more of these because, the first one was a major success. I mean, we had so many people there and great speakers. And, these issues we talk about are not going away. And as the synthetic left, as you have labeled it, identified it, I think that's a very apt way to identify them. They are literally crumbling before our very eyes. Like they're crumbling, and then in some cases they're blending in with the likes of Kamala Harris and Beto O'Rourke. So no one trusts that. No one believes in that. It's a failed ideology. And we post something new, we post something exciting, we post something that strikes at the heart of, really, really evokes like an emotional response from the heart of every American, and whether they're conservative or left or whatever, So I look forward to building this with you guys, and thank you for the work.
And thank you for coming out. And it was a very powerful and successful weekend. Much appreciated, and have a good flight. We'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
All right.
Jackson.
See you guys.
You.
Peace.
Yep. Great. Well, that was Jackson Hinkle giving his reflections on the conference we had this weekend. So much that we could talk about, so many deceptions. The current line that we're getting from U.S. media is that this whole crisis in Ukraine was caused by Putin's mental health. You heard this, Ben?
I've heard it. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's all caused by Putin's personal mental health. Putin's just having a breakdown, and that caused it. That's really interesting, because back in 1997, before Putin was the Russian president and the Russian leader, we have a clip of a certain Joe Biden, and this is what he said.
Place, greatest consternation would be caused in the short term for admission, have nothing to do with the merit and preparedness of the country to come in, would be to admit the Baltic states now in terms of NATO-Russian, U.S.-Russian relations. And if there was ever anything that was going to tip the balance, were it to be tipped in terms of a vigorous and hostile reaction, I don't mean military, in Russia, it would be that. So the way I look at the calculus here is...
Yeah. So we have Biden saying the only thing that could possibly lead to this is if more countries started joining NATO. He's on the clip saying that if more countries start joining NATO, if Baltic states start joining NATO, if NATO continues expanding, a conflict between the United States and NATO countries and Russia could break out. He's saying that before Putin was ever in power. So it seems pretty clear that this is not caused by Putin's mental health. This is a legit security concern on the part of Russia, right? If you have a hostile military alliance creeping closer and closer to your borders, at some point there's going to be a response. And NATO has always been hostile to Russia. It was formed to counter the rise of the Soviet Union and the people's democracies after the Second World War. So, I mean, it's particularly outrageous. It really just kind of shows you how shallow the analysis is. I mean, we've already seen the clip of Kamala Harris, and she gave analysis of it, which is basically Russia, big country, Ukraine, small country, Russia attack Ukraine, big country attack small country, this wrong. And that's her analysis of the whole conflict. It shows you how shallow these things really are. And that, one thing that people are not taking into account is that Russia worked really, really, really hard to try and not have this happen. The Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic asked for recognition from Russia back in 2014. Russia said no. And instead, Russia facilitated the Minsk Accords and the Minsk negotiations. They wanted Ukraine to integrate the republics back into Ukrainian society, give them autonomy, and bring them in under the Minsk agreements. And the Minsk agreement was not implemented. That's the most important thing here. If Russia had just wanted to seize Donetsk and Lugansk because the people there are Russian speaking, they would have done that in 2014. They specifically didn't do that. And they set up the Minsk Accords. They worked to facilitate an agreement where these regions would be integrated back into Ukrainian society. And the Ukrainians did not follow the treaty, and they didn't carry out the Minsk Accords. They did not fulfill their obligations. And Russia waited for 7 years after the Minsk Accords were signed. And now in 2022, after an agreement that was not signed and not put into practice from 2015 has been ignored, now Russia is taking action. And let's also keep in mind, they took action to stop a massacre. And no one's talking about this, but basically, people have gone after me. I just want to talk about this. So there's clips of me saying that Russia is not going to invade Ukraine. And people are like, oh, Russia's invaded Ukraine. We got you. Well, Russia's not invading Ukraine. Depends what definition you use of invading. But what's happened was this, that about a month ago, we had the United States going around saying Russia is about to invade Ukraine. And Russia was like, no, we're not. And they said, no, Russia is about to invade Ukraine. And Russia said, no, we really aren't going to invade Ukraine. They pointed to the military exercises that Russia was doing in Belarus. And they said, these military exercises in Belarus, that means you're going to invade Ukraine. And Russia said, we do that every year We informed you we were going to do that. We're not going to invade Ukraine. But the USA wouldn't drop this. So believe it or not, you never saw this on American media, but we saw a video of it. I mean, it was definitely happening. Russia started moving their troops away from the border. Have you seen the video? Yeah, they were moving their troops away from the border to appease the United States. Just because the United States was so adamant Russia was about to invade Ukraine, they started moving their troops away from the border. And then the shelling escalated. Bombs went off in Luhansk and Donetsk. And at that point, it was clear that what the United States was doing was they were getting ready to facilitate the Ukrainian government going into Luhansk and Donetsk and slaughtering these people. And the whole idea was to try to intimidate Russia and basically make Russia afraid to move in and protect these people from the slaughter. Well, Russia made clear, though, they were not going to be intimidated, and they did move in to protect these people. And the slaughter that was planned, the massacre that was being planned, was prevented by Russia recognizing Lugansk and Donetsk and moving their forces in. So basically, this was Russia moving in to prevent a massacre, and now they're moving in to take apart the Ukrainian military. That all those high-tech weapons the United States has poured into Ukraine, that Azov battalion that's committed atrocities, they're ripping it apart. And so basically, Russia moved in to prevent a massacre and to try and end an 8-year war. And that's not been reported. So these people are like, oh, Caleb said they're not going to invade Ukraine, and they did. No, they were not. They were not trying to. It was the United States that provoked this, essentially. Number one, and number two, they're not invading Ukraine. They have no intention of absorbing Ukraine into the Russian Federation. The idea is to break apart the Ukrainian military and secure the protection of the people in Lugansk and Donetsk. And that means not only, moving their troops to protect the people in the eastern regions, it also means breaking apart this fascistic extremist military that the United States has facilitated in Ukraine. And all they would have to do to end this, and this is the most crazy thing, all the Ukrainian government would have to do to end this is, recognize Lugansk and Donetsk's independence.
As well as Crimea's.
And Crimea's. And then on top of that, agree to be neutral and not be a U.S.-aligned country and not, have U.S. weapons piling in, not join NATO. And if Ukraine can be neutral and it can recognize these people's independence after they've made clear they will not let these people integrate back into Ukrainian society, then the fighting ends. But they won't do that. And that's, all this heart beating from U.S. leaders about Ukraine. They care about Ukraine so much. It's all theatrics. They want Ukrainians to die and keep dying because they want to hurt Russia. That's what's going on here. They want the body count in Ukraine to keep rising. They want Ukrainians to keep dying because this is about hurting Russia. It has nothing to do with caring about Ukraine, because if they cared about Ukraine, the U.S. and NATO folks who control and tell Zelensky what to do, it's not an independent country. He's not an independent actor. They would tell him to just sign the treaty and end it. But they won't do that. It's not about helping Ukrainians. This is about fighting Russia. And that's what this is about. And we have to be absolutely clear on that. So actually, we have with us a special guest. He joined us yesterday, but Tom, my good friend Tom Mitchlack from Detroit, is coming on. And Tom actually had some interesting experiences because he's met some of these victims of the conflict that U.S. media has ignored. He actually has been to Russia and met some of the victims of the Ukrainian Azov battalion and shelling. So come on in, Tom. Come on in. Have a seat. Have a seat. Welcome back, Tom. How you doing? And you were in Russia, and you witnessed the shelling. I guess you spoke with people who were victims of what's going on in eastern Ukraine. Can you talk about that?
I did. I went to, the occasion that brought me to Russia was the 1-year anniversary of Maidan in Ukraine. I attended the anti-Maidan demonstration in Moscow, which was very widely attended. It was an international news event that was taking place. It also just happened to be the 75th or the 70th anniversary of the Yalta Conference. And so it was with what's going on in Ukraine, to have to ask the question in the modern day, why can't the United States and Russia get along like they once did in an effort to defeat fascism? And on my trip, I did go to a children's hospital in Moscow that had children from the Donbass region, many of whom were horrifically maimed. And some of them I spoke to. People like to talk about, the lived experiences of people, and these same people want, with regards to Ukraine, like, oh, well, you can't speak on the war in Ukraine. You don't know what it's like to have shelling upon your head. But this only applies to, it's very selectively applied. It doesn't apply to Russian-speaking children. And there was one boy that I met, his name was Vanya. He lost his legs, he lost his arms, he was blinded by shrapnel. He was 7 years old when I spoke to him. His younger brother, Artyom, was killed, unfortunately. He was 4 years old. Up to that point, they were living in basements to avoid the shelling of the Kiev regime. And, you know, one thing that really broke my heart is he told me when I spoke to him that what he liked to do most of all before being injured was he liked to run, ride his bike, and most of all, he said he'd like to win.
Wow.
And, you know, these are the things that never got a moment. No one seemed to care.
Yeah, these lives don't matter according to U.S. media. These lives just don't matter. I mean, that's just the attitude that they have. Look, Don Deering in New York, he said, I read that the 14,000 figure is between 2014 and 2020, actually. So there must be more by now. I haven't seen the UN document, but that's what I read. So it's more than 14,000 of these people that have been killed. And what's shocking is on the internet, there's all these, you know, pro-Ukraine, you know, bots and trolls out there. And whenever you bring up this number of 14,000 people killed in these regions, they'll respond with, oh yeah, well, they're just separatists. So they don't matter, right? Because they're Russian speaking, because they don't recognize the government that the USA illegally installed in Kiev in 2014. They don't matter. Oh no, those aren't people, they're separatists. And I believe that was actually said during the Odessa massacre.
Exactly. I was following, what prompted me to go to Russia on this occasion in the first place was my intense following of the situation in Ukraine. And simultaneously, I'm watching literally a live feed of the Odessa massacre taking place. I'm seeing it with my own eyes. And then meanwhile, I'm listening to NPR on the radio, and they're telling me that, oh, they're just kind of casually reporting an instance of clashes in Odessa between police and rebels, and a fire broke out. It's a very innocuous way to put neo-Nazis and ultranationalists chasing just essentially peace activists, you could say, into a building, setting it on fire, and those who jump out are beaten and shot. That's one way to put it. But, you know, they're just rebels.
Yeah, there's a clip from video of the Odessa massacre where there's a woman who jumped out of the building, I believe, the burning building, right after these Ukrainian fascists lit a building on fire. This woman jumps out of the building, and one of the Ukrainians goes to rush at her with a baseball bat. And the other says, no, stop, she's a woman. And then he replies and said, no, she's not a woman, she's a separatist. And then
that's the NPR line.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's unbelievable. And again, you know, they make it sound like this just started. All of a sudden, there's this huge amount of mourning for the victims in Ukraine. We're finding out that a lot of these videos they're showing us aren't even real videos. Okay, keep that in mind. The people today, just recently, I mean, earlier today in Donetsk, 20 civilians were killed by a rocket that was fired, and I posted about this, right? That the Ukrainians, they shot this rocket, they killed 20 people, 23 people, other people were injured. And I had people, yeah, well, what about what Putin's doing? Well, we know now that a lot of the video that allegedly showing the suffering of Ukrainian civilians is from Syria, is from Libya, is from Palestine, is from video games. Right, so it's like a lot of the images they're showing us of Ukrainian suffering aren't real. Number one, and then number two, there's been people dying and suffering for the past 8 years in the eastern regions, but they just don't matter according to American media.
It's amazing that it's actually very revealing that the depths that they have to sink to even drudge up fake distortions of what's going on in Ukraine are crimes committed by the people that are urging you to stand with Ukraine today. It's actually tremendous. This is probably, I mean, in my lifetime, this is probably one of the most overwhelming propaganda campaigns and just drenched in phoniness and hypocrisy. Something I've never seen in my lifetime. That's absolutely for sure.
Yeah, we're trying to get our microphone here working. It just so we got the regular. Our microphone's back on, so there we go. Microphone's back on, so your audio is coming through well.
Okay,
so we're figuring out the tech of doing this. I've normally just been doing streams where I just talk into my phone. I just hold my phone up and talk into my phone, but now we're doing it all fancy with the webcam and the step and repeat behind us and all of that.
Good setup.
Yeah, and that's why I know that the people of Donetsk and Lugansk already know about our conference. right? They haven't seen the video yet because the video is not yet available. They saw that we were there with the flag. They saw that we were there with the Z, which is the symbol of Russia's military denazification campaign. And and it meant the world to them. Yeah. Right. I mean, it must have meant the world to them that there's people here in the heart of the empire who actually care about them, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, I think our conference was a smashing success. We just heard from Jackson Hinkle talking about it. And
we're the only people, for the most part, who are willing to. I mean, there's a lot of ridicule online of, you know, that we're supporting what Putin is doing. Oh, you know, like unironic. Oh, yeah, we do. I mean, as going back to the Odessa massacre, the Russian officials know the names of the participants of the Odessa massacre. And, you know, if the tables were turned, it's events like the Odessa massacre that can serve as a catalyst for all manner of imperialist intrigue and intervention. But, you know, but because the tables are turned, it's completely swept under the rug, and we're getting this phony narrative. Everything about it, whether it be the president of Ukraine himself, the so-called President Zelensky, being a literal actor puppet, a phony to the ghost of Kiev, and any other instance of, you know, any viral event or sentiment that we're being fed, it's all a load of garbage. It's from the top down.
One thing I was really touched by was a number of like local Russians from Texas came to our conference. And Jenny Lynn here in the chat, she said, "Shit, I'm going to cry. I can't imagine what it's like to be Russian in the US right now." Yeah. And that's why they were there, I think, is because of the sentiments. You know, I mean, it's basically we're hearing that Russians are evil, Russians are barbarians. Now, I heard this story from Germany. Can we confirm this? That they are actually marking stores as Russian-owned business?
I have heard this. I can't confirm it, but this
in Germany, folks, in Germany, right? They are marking stores owned by ethnic Russians and Russian speakers.
I've seen stores and restaurants and so on. I mean, again, this is just something I've seen online that are, you know, signs saying no Russian citizens may enter.
Wow.
Yeah.
And there's a hospital in Germany as well that has allegedly posted a notification saying they won't treat Russian-speaking citizens.
Wow.
Such humanitarians, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really unbelievable what's happening right now. They banned Anastasia from ABC.
Tchaikovsky is no good.
Yeah. And, you know, we were talking about this earlier, but, you know, they're trying to blame us all on Putin's mental health. And I got to tell you, I've been in the same room as Putin on 2 occasions. Mm-hmm. That guy doesn't blink. You know what I mean? Like, that guy is the most straight shooter I've ever seen. If there's anyone who is very, very, very together, it's that guy. You know what I mean? I mean, he doesn't miss a word. He does not stutter. He is very clear. You know, I mean, the idea that this is all just him having a meltdown or something is ridiculous, right? And another point that needs to be made, and this is one thing I don't get, is that we see a lot of like leftists who are jumping on the bandwagon of this. If the Communist Party of Gennady Zyuganov and Pavel Grudinin and others had been in power, this probably would have happened 8 years ago.
That's their critique. That it's, you know, I follow Zyuganov on Instagram, and what he posts is mostly saying, you know, I mean, really, to the extent that any opposition that he has to it is that it's not thorough enough.
Yeah, I mean, the communists have been calling for this. They're the ones that introduced the bill in the Russian legislature, the Duma, asking for this to happen. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the Venezuelan communists, they support Donetsk and Lugansk. Absolutely. The Nicaraguan communists support them. The Houthi revolutionaries of Iran support them. You can go down the list. You know, I mean, China hasn't officially recognized the 2 republics, but they're more or less saying that they support Russia in this operation. North Korea is supporting the peoples of Donetsk and Lugansk. I mean, and the ban on communist parties, right? That's one thing in Ukraine. They've outlawed all communist parties in the areas that are now liberated by Russia. The communists are allowed to operate again. So, I mean, it's like, if you're a leftist at all, if you're a Marxist or a leftist, I mean, you have to understand what side to be on. I mean, it just should be obvious.
If there's any doubt, I mean, I would encourage people to look at the Congress of the PC, of the ruling party of Venezuela, their Congress, when the Russian ambassador was greeted by the conference, it broke out into applause, chanting. It was even like more than I think it was more than the ambassador would have expected. It was something that it lasted for like a minute. The cheering and the shouting. I think that like the progressive forces in the world, with the exception of the few the so-called progressive forces in the Western world, who are, you know, in the grand scheme of things, they're a minority. I mean, it's pretty clear where the world stands on this, I think.
Oh, totally. You know, when I was in Nicaragua, the day after the re-election of Daniel Ortega, at the kind of inauguration celebration. I was there with the international guests. We've been election observers, and the Russian ambassador was there. And Daniel Ortega, the socialist president, he thanked the Russian ambassador for the support that Nicaragua has gotten and the recognition of their elections. Huge standing ovation for the Russian ambassador. I mean, Russia is a friend of socialists and Marxists and revolutionaries in the world. There's no question about it. Also now, interestingly, now Russia, has been friendly to Israel, right? And there is like Russia, while it's friendly to Syria, it's friendly to Iran, it's also been friendly to Israel. But one thing that I've noticed, which is interesting, is I guess today there's been a development where I guess Israel at this point is joining the sanctions against Russia. Is that's the latest development, right?
That's what I read. Yeah.
Tell.
I guess after a bit of pressure from the Western allies of Israel, they caved. And this is what a lot of countries have tried to do in the past. They try to pit Russia and China and the US against each other for their gain. And we're hitting a point in the international geopolitical scene where you're going to have to pick a side. And I think that Israel has made their side very clear.
Yeah. And it's really just wild. It's absolutely wild. To think about that. Now, one thing I did want to do, I wanted to show this clip because Tulsi Gabbard, the former U.S. Congresswoman from Hawaii, who I've had the honor of meeting on one occasion, there was a reception in New York where I actually got to meet her. I asked her some questions, and she has taken some bold stances. Not everything she's ever said do I agree with, but she is on foreign policy. She is outspoken about Syria and other things. This is a video she recently posted, and she's getting a huge amount of flack for posting. Let's play the video.
Undeniable facts. There are 25 to 30 U.S.-funded biolabs in Ukraine. According to the U.S. government, these biolabs are conducting research on dangerous pathogens. Ukraine is in an active war zone with widespread bombing, artillery, and shelling, and these facilities, even in the best of circumstances, could easily be compromised and release these deadly pathogens. Now, like COVID, these pathogens know no borders. If they are inadvertently or purposely breached or compromised, they will quickly spread all throughout Europe, the United States, and the rest of the world, causing untold suffering and death. So in order to protect the American people, the people of Europe, the people around the world, these labs need to be shut down immediately, and the pathogens that they hold need to be destroyed. Instead of trying to cover this up, the Biden-Harris administration needs to work with Russia, Ukraine, NATO, the UN to immediately implement a ceasefire for all military action in the vicinity of these labs until they're secured and these pathogens are destroyed. Now, in addition to all this, the US funds around 300 biolabs around the world who are engaging in dangerous research, including gain of function, similar to the lab in Wuhan, where COVID-19 may have originated from. Now, after realizing how dangerous and vulnerable these labs are, they should have all been shut down 2 years ago, but they haven't. Now, this is not a partisan political issue. The administration and Congress need to act now for the health and well-being of every American and every person on this planet.
All right. Wow. What's your reaction to that, Tom?
Well, there's something remarkable. When the Olympics were opening up, there's a joint statement put out by the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China outlining many things about the new era that we're entering, the desire for win-win cooperation between states. But there was one bit in there that struck me at the time was some put in a diplomatic way an urging of the United States to come clean on its these such labs. And this was before, when this was first being talked about, sort of bubbling underneath the surface, it was cast aside as like QAnon conspiracy stuff. And then, it sort of transcended each level of like acceptability in the discourse. And now we're at the point where Tulsi Gabbard can say this, and even Tucker Carlson say so, the most watched cable news commentator, that this is something that I feel like everybody knows. And at this time, but now they've turned the tables and they're doing damage control, alleging that it's Russia that's going to unleash they deny that there's anything dangerous going on in these labs, but on the other side of their mouth, they say that they're afraid that Russia is going to release what is in there as a weapon. So what is it? You know, I think there's growing pressure internationally for the United States to come clean on this.
Now, we did have a question in the chat. So we're going to do what we normally do, which is in the second half of the show, we answer the questions. So if you can open a Word document and just type, what did Lenin think of Ukraine? I'll just pull that up, right? You can just, here, we'll select all, delete, and if you can type, what did Lenin think of Ukraine? We're going to be writing super chats, because that's what makes this channel popular, is I do this like 20 questions thing, where I just answer super chats for the rest of the night.
I do it sometimes.
Yeah. And it's a lot of fun. So we're writing down, what did Lenin think of Ukraine? That's the first question we'll get to in the second half of the show. Ben has written it down already. So keep in mind, you are in there. And if there's another question you'd like me to answer in the second half of the show, Ben is running the chat, and he will put it on the screen and type it up, and we'll answer it in the second half of the show. But as far back to what we were talking about now, I just had to get that out of the way. But as far as the issue with Ukraine, look, I mean, okay, so the USA invaded Iraq, alleging that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, which could be chemical and biological weapons, could be a nuclear weapon, etc. Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction.
And if they did have them, where'd they get them from? From the United States.
That's true. The States did, provide chemical weapons to Iraq during the 1980s when they were backing them against the Islamic Republic. And so Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction. And the USA invaded Iraq based on a lie that they might have them. But now we find out that not only has this hostile government been installed by the United States right on Russia's border, that's a fact, right? The USA has poured weapons into this hostile government. This hostile government has made Nazis an official division of their military, the Azov Battalion. But now the United States has helped these fanatically anti-Russian folks right on Russia's border in Ukraine set up biological weapons labs.
Is that not an adequate reason to intervene?
Yeah, I mean, you think of so say Mexico were aligned with Russia. And Russia started building chemical and biological weapons labs in Mexico, right on the border. Do you think the United States would be okay with that?
Not for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's so obvious that Russia is doing what any country would do under these circumstances, but they're Russia, and Russia bad, right? And it's like, and when you talk about these biolabs, I've had people say, well, that's just a conspiracy theory. We have Victoria Nuland, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, talking about these labs. They admit that they've been doing this. The U.S. government admits it's been making biological weapons labs in Ukraine. And somehow the story is, because Russia has now intervened, they're worried that Russia might do something. They're kind of missing the point here, right? It's like the story is that Russia knew this all along, right? They knew that there were, biological weapons labs going on. They didn't make it public until now, but they knew. So the United States not only armed extremists, not only toppled the Ukrainian government, not only didn't implement the Minsk agreement, but now on top of that, we find out that there are a number of these labs where they're making germs. And like Tulsi Gabbard said, in the context of COVID and pandemics, like what in the world are we doing?
Yeah, even if people want to quibble that, these labs are not, there's nothing dangerous about them. They're not weapons. But
bioweapons. What could be dangerous about that?
Right? Anything that's going on that's studying, if you are studying dangerous pathogens and trying to figure out only, benevolently trying to study them in order to prevent any sort of, were they to break out, we need a means by which to cure them. But I mean, anything can be weaponized. I mean, just by the fact they are, it's implicit that they can be weaponized. Just on the face of it,
the biological weapons. One of the first references to them, I believe, is a short story by H.G. Wells. He wrote called "The Stolen Bacillus." Have you ever heard of this?
No.
And it's a short story that H.G. Wells, the Fabian socialist science fiction writer, wrote. He's the guy who wrote The Time Machine. What are some of his other books?
The one where the Martians come. And,
is that him? Yeah.
War of the Worlds.
Yeah, War of the Worlds. H.G. Wells. Yeah. And he wrote this short story, which I read when I was in high school. I got the short stories of H.G. Wells, which is and he wrote a lot of short stories. And one of them is about an anarchist who goes to a lab. Right. And I guess there's this laboratory where there's this doctor who's like, we have this deadly disease here in the lab. And he's like, I don't know why the anarchists use bombs, when they could just use a disease like this or whatever. And then some anarchist breaks into the lab. And so the police are chasing him. And he's got this vial with a deadly disease in it. And they've got him and he's cornered. So then he drinks it and jumps into the river and contaminates the water. And that's how the story ends. You know, it's kind of a dark story.
Not a happy ending.
Yeah, but it's basically H.G. Wells like kind of warning about the danger of biological weapons.
Yeah.
And the line that stands out in the story is like the scientist who made the deadly weapon. It says something to the effect of, "I don't know why anarchists use bombs when they could use germs." Like that's the line. And it's really kind of eerie because it's true, right? I mean, germs can kill a lot more people. You know, a bomb goes off, it kills a bunch of people in a building or something, but germ warfare, that stuff is really, really deadly.
Yeah. I mean, even just regardless of whatever the origins of COVID may be, the fact that one virus has reshaped so much of our lives across the whole world, it's probably one of the most potent weapons that exists.
Sure. I mean, COVID has devastated the U.S. economy. The suicide rate has gone through the roof. The economy is just in shambles. You know, depression is on the rise. Drug-related deaths are on the rise. The life expectancy of the United States has gone down a couple of years since the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And these lockdowns are continuing. A lot of people think that these lockdowns are not really necessary. You know, I'm not a medical expert. I don't want to get into the specifics about biology and all of that because I just don't know it, right? And I'll get it wrong, and then someone will, they got me. I got it wrong. So I'm not going there about the biology. I'm not a biologist, but there's debate about these lockdowns and their impact. But since then, I mean, they have, you know, we've seen a significant loss of life, not just as a result of the disease, but as a result of the lockdowns. And on top of that, you want to add to that, you know, we're being told that these lockdowns are necessary because COVID is so dangerous.
Right.
So in that context, wouldn't it make sense that, you know, if people are afraid that this COVID came from a lab in China, wouldn't we immediately shut down any such lab that could do something like this?
We should at least revisit like whatever our current policies are and do everything that, like, you know, another thing, why is it that if the United States is now claiming that they're concerned that the Russians are going to do something nefarious with their labs and that they were unable to secure them, there's an invasion that they've been predicting for months and saying it's imminent, it's going to happen. Why didn't they secure these labs? Why are they so concerned?
Right. I mean, are we gonna see an outbreak of the, you know, COVID 2.0 and it's Russia's fault? Is that what we're gonna be told? You know, I mean, it wasn't enough to blame COVID on China. Now they got to blame. It'll be COVID 2.0. It'll be Russia's fault.
They're going to explicitly say that Russia did it maliciously and deliberately to, I don't know, just wreak havoc on Ukraine for some reason.
They already tried. This was the crazy thing. So last week they tried to say that Russia had attacked a nuclear power plant, and that was bullshit. And that was completely debunked. What had happened was Russia moved in, they went to the power plant and they basically said, okay, Russian military is protecting it. Ukrainian military is out of the area. They were there, and it was Ukrainians came near the power plant. They shot at Russian troops who were guarding it, and the Russian troops shot back. And as the Ukrainians were retreating, they lit a fire. The fire department came and put it out. That's all that happened. But they had it all over the media that Russia was like shooting bombs or attacking a power plant, and that the goal was to like set off a dirty bomb and spread radiation. And the Russian foreign minister, you know, I mean, and Sergei Lavrov and Maria Zakharova and their representative Nebenzi at the UN, they called a special UN meeting about this. And the Russian representative got up and he said, no, why would we want huge amounts of radiation? Have you seen a map? Ukraine and Russia are pretty darn close. That would all,
no sense.
It would not benefit Russia in any conceivable way. So it was just outrageous.
Yeah, in general, I mean, this is something I've thought about a lot with the propaganda that we see, like the idea that big bad Putin is coming in to stomp all over Ukraine. I think it's projection because, I mean, this is maybe just kind of sort of how I see things maybe, but, you know, an Atlanticist way of going to a country and waging war, I think is different than, I guess, a more land, like if you're going across an ocean to deal militarily with a country, you can get away with having complete disregard for the state of the country, how many people you kill, what you do, because you're just going to pick up and leave anyway.
Right.
But if you're in one piece of land, moving to the neighboring one without the intent, whether you have the intention of staying there or not, there is an incentive to do as little damage as possible, particularly in the case of Russia, not only because there's so much scrutiny on them, but they have to deal with the consequences after. They can't just, Ukraine ain't going anywhere.
Right.
You know? So the whole idea that they're interested in wasn't that in Kharkov, the nuclear plant, a place that I don't know how many kilometers away it is from the present Russian border, but they want to deal with the lasting consequences, and the United States is more concerned with those consequences than the Russians themselves. Maybe it makes no sense.
Oh, sure, and you can add to it. This was like a twofer because not only could they demonize Russia and play up the fear of Russia, They could also get into people's heads something they've been trying to push for years, which is nuclear power. Bad. And where does that come from? Big oil companies, right? Because nuclear power threatens to put oil companies out of business. Right. And that's what they're afraid of. Right. And they've been doing this for years. Right. The idea that nuclear power is just unsafe. It's too dangerous. Nuclear power bad. That's been a long-term agenda of the big oil companies, who also see Russia as a major competitor, a major exporter of oil and gas. Of course. So, you think about, the big super major oil companies, Chevron, BP, Shell, and ExxonMobil. They're based in Wall Street and in London. They dominate the world. And they're afraid of nuclear power. They're afraid of Russia and China rising up from poverty. They're afraid of any competition. They want to dominate the global oil markets and keep the world poor. And their solution to global warming is not let's invest in fusion energy, which would actually get us beyond fossil fuels. It would be a higher energy
They don't want us to know what that is.
Yeah. Their solution is let's just, because of climate change, we'll all reduce consumption. We'll reduce the amount of oil and gas in the world. And these frackers who are like competing with us, they have to just go out of business. And these developing countries that might develop their own oil and gas and start competing with us, they got to be removed. And everyone will just kind of get poorer and they'll stay at the top and that'll be perfect. That's their solution to climate change. And if you read the documents that are being published by these, environmental research agencies and think tanks that are linked to big oil companies and funded by them, that's their solution. It's the perfect solution for big oil. Right. No fusion energy, no countries around the world getting their independence, but just kind of stop development. Imagine like a game of King of the Mountain. Right. And one kid gets to the top and he says, all right, game over. I'm at the top. Yeah. That's their solution. And they're using climate change to push this. Meanwhile, in China, they're doing amazing breakthroughs in fusion energy with their artificial suns. It's like unbelievably amazing what China is doing. No word about it in U.S. media.
When the artificial suns are reported, it's not framed in the context of breakthroughs in new forms of energy. I mean, the impression that I get looking at Western media reporting on it, to the extent that they do, is it's like a weird oddity, like he's Doc Ock or something like that in China. Like, oh, they're just doing this. Like, what's it for? It's not really explained.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, if we could get cold fusion, the results of that would completely be a game changer in the global energy markets. Electricity would be so widely available and so widely cheap. And that's what motivated, China's missions to the moon, right? When they were acquiring helium-3, because helium-3 is very key in this fusion energy research. And, we should all be desperately wanting fusion energy. All these people who are like climate catastrophists, they're not supporting China and they're not supporting fusion energy. Putin has called for a global united campaign around fusion energy. But all these people that are like, oh my God, we're all going to die. The climate, it's like the climate cults, right? It's like they're out there and they got that symbol of the hourglass. Right? We're all going to die and reduce consumption.
They want us to eat bugs, live in a pod, and never have children, and maybe become robots.
Yeah, and Greta Thunberg is like, how dare you? How dare you? You want economic growth? You can't. And it's like if you really believe all of this, right? If you're really buying into this, some of this I think is just a little bit over the top and catastrophic. I think climate change is a fact. I don't deny it, but I think
something happening.
Yeah, there's clearly a problem in the environment, right? But at the same time, like if they really believe this, why are they not supporting fusion energy?
Sure.
That would be.
Do they know what it is?
Yeah. Do they even know what it? Did they ever considering it as an option? No.
Windmills.
Yeah. Windmills. Right. Windmills and solar panels. They're great. There's nothing wrong with windmills. Sure. Nothing wrong with solar panels. They're not the answer, right?
I'd like to have solar panels on my house. That'd be nice.
Yeah, sure.
Is that going to? If they're telling us that there's climate catastrophe that will end life on Earth as we know it, really, these windmills, is that really the solution to an eschatological catastrophe? I don't
right. It's like they're controlling the narrative so carefully around this, where it's like they're. It's so utterly ridiculous. And the nuclear power, the anti-nuclear movement has been run by big oil since the beginning. There's a lot of documentation of that. I'm actually working on a book on the synthetic left. I'm going to talk about that. And, it's an interesting study. It's an interesting case study because most of the communist groups in the United States defended nuclear power. Nuclear power was considered to be. If you say that like we don't trust private companies to run nuclear power, that's one thing, right? We can get behind that. Same with GMOs, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with genetically modified foods, but I don't trust Monsanto.
Exactly.
Right. I don't trust private capitalist corporations to manipulate them. There's nothing inherently wrong with nuclear power. It's just we obviously want public ownership and workers' control over it because capitalists are always cutting corners and trying to make profits. And so we would want there to be public oversight to make sure it's safe. But what is crazy is that, you know, in the 1980s, you had these anti-nuclear protests, right? And you had the Communist Party USA, Gus Hall, Victor Perlo. They came out and they said, well, you know, nuclear power is not bad. You know, just and other groups also. And I mean, the point was basically that if you're sitting there and you're saying, okay, well, you can't split an atom. That's just wrong. That's like playing God. Mm-hmm. That's not Marxism anymore. No, that's not scientific socialism. You've entered a religious, you know, realm. That's an
obscurantist,
right?
Backward-looking thing,
right? And you know, I mean, that's the same with GMOs, right? If you're sitting there saying, well, you can't change the genes of how we grow. Again, you're
always done.
Yeah, you're entering this like spiritual, religious thing. Yeah. You have a right to your beliefs, but that's not Marxism.
Yeah, well, let's just be barefoot, digging in the mud with our bare hands.
Maybe we shouldn't have electricity. You know, I mean, and if God had meant for man to fly, He'd go to give him wings. Let's get rid of airplanes. You know, I mean, in my hometown, apparently there were a couple pastors who wouldn't fly on planes. They were like conservative Mennonites, and they just planes was just too much. You know, they just wouldn't fly on airplanes. It was a little bit weird, but but when it comes to that, like the idea that nuclear power was inherently bad, that was not Marxism. And Sam Marcy of the Workers' World Party, he always made that point. He would say, you know, after Fukushima, it was pointed out that, you know, I think there were some people in the Workers' World Party who said, well, Sam Marcy always insisted we never say we're against nuclear power, right? That the idea is we don't trust the private corporations. But in the 80s, we started seeing like the Marxist left because there was this huge anti-nuclear mobilization going on in the country, led by the Democrats. Right. And it was against nuclear weapons and nuclear power. And they were making towns into nuclear free zones. And it was this whole thing. We saw the Marxist groups gradually, one step at a time, just kind of, okay, you know, nuclear power being unsafe, nuclear power is bad. They just went along with it.
Yeah.
And the results is, you know, a prevailing, you know, domination of left circles by non-scientific voices. And that, you know, basically, I mean, nuclear power enables countries to break out of dependence on big oil companies. Mm-hmm. If you're an oil importing country, you know, there's a reason the Soviet Union had so much nuclear power. It's because, you know, they wanted to sell their oil on international markets. They didn't want to use their oil to make electricity. And that the nuclear power gives independence. Iran's nuclear energy program has been so viciously attacked, but it's peaceful. But, you know, it's a peaceful nuclear energy program. Wild fact, in the 1980s, I believe, what was the year? 81, 82, Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi Ba'ath Socialist government was making nuclear power plants. And they contracted a French nuclear power company to make nuclear power plants in Iraq. And Israel bombed their facility. Right. You know about this?
Yeah, and they killed them, yes.
And they didn't just kill, they killed a number of Iraqis. They even killed a French citizen in response to this, right? And it was completely outrageous. And that the campaign against nuclear power, it comes from the big oil companies. That's exactly who it comes from. And it's about trying to keep themselves at the top of the world.
Yeah.
And and the left has kind of just, and this is part of the synthetic left. If you look at a lot of the left money, the foundation, it comes from the Rockefellers, it comes from ExxonMobil, the Ford Foundation, that's Henry Ford Motor Company, but it's basically dominated by big oil forces. It's the estate, the trust of Henry Ford and the people that run it. And if you look at, it's like the CIA, the synthetic left is basically big oil, right? It's the CIA and big oil. Mm-hmm. That's who is behind George Soros, the Rockefellers, JP Morgan Chase Bank is the Rockefellers bank, and then JP Morgan, the Morgan family are in there. It's big oil that is really running the left right now.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes me wonder, like, what does, in this current climate, when we talk about left and right, like, what are we really talking about? If left means to be aligned and controlled by the richest, most powerful people strangling the planet, then what do these words even mean anymore?
Right. I mean, and I talk a lot about divisions in the ruling class, and you know, there have been fights in the ruling class. I mean, there was an attempt to remove Roosevelt from office. The National Association of Manufacturers, Henry Morgan and Henry Ford, they wanted Roosevelt out, but the Rockefellers were for Roosevelt. And so, you know, there was a fight in the ruling class, and you know, there's a long-standing division between like big capitalists and the lower level capitalists. You look at like the 1960s, the John Birch Society. I think it was the guy from like Welch's was it Welch's, great candy company or something. He was the big John Birch Society funder.
The juice company?
I think so. If I'm not mistaken, it was Robert Welch, and he like owned a candy company or something. He was the big funder of the John Birch Society. And it was like, these were lower level capitalists.
Sure.
And they were writing these screeds, these manifestos saying like the Rockefellers are communists, President Eisenhower's a communist. What they were really saying is they were saying big capital. They were saying big capital is communist because they're regulating the economy in a way that we're not able to be fair, fair competition.
Yeah, against the monopolies. Yeah, they're shut out.
Right. And that's what, when you listen to like Alex Jones and a lot of these right-wing libertarian types, when they're calling the big capitalists communists, what they mean is that they're using the government to rig and secure their monopoly.
And they don't have access.
Yeah. And so they want more of a libertarian model because they want it to be more of a fair competition. And that's kind of the divide. There's a really good book by Carl Oglesby, who was the leader of Students for a Democratic Society in the 60s. It's called The Yankee and Cowboy War. And it talks about how, he talks about the Yankees being the New England establishment, the Anglo-American establishment, the Eastern establishment, Rockefellers, big oil, and the Cowboys being, weapons manufacturers and, like tycoons and these lower level capitalists that are more out of Texas, places like that. And that there's been this deep-seated divide among the capitalist class. The military industrial complex, the lower level capitalists, they tend to be more right wing, but at the same time, the Eastern establishment is much more like social engineering oriented. Sure. It's about, they're liberal in the sense that they want to control people.
Yeah. I mean, when people think of like when people say that, there's no difference between the Republicans and Democrats, I'm not making like a qualitative judgment as to who is better or worse, but to deny that there are different class forces between one versus the other. When Republicans are talking about the Green New Deal and that's communism, whatever, they're trying to take away your burgers. That's not all theater. Obviously, they're trying to appeal to people in maybe superficial ways, but this isn't pure theater. This is like different sections of the ruling class. Clearly, there is a line between them at this point. And it seems more pronounced since, you could argue that the seeds of it, the seed of the plant that we have now, or maybe during the Obama era, when you have the Tea Party and these different, you're not traditional Republicans gaining prominence, and principally under Trump, there seems to be very clearly at this point at least a difference.
Sure. Well, Tom, it's been a real pleasure to have you on here. Thanks
you
for sharing your unique experience in Russia, seeing the victims of this war that U.S. media ignores. It's really been a pleasure to have you on here.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, best wishes. So if anybody else has a question, mind you, just send it on in. Ben is going to answer it. People love that 20 questions. I answer any question on Marxism or theory. Occasionally somebody will ask me a question I just can't answer. They'll be like, hey, Caleb, what's your opinion of blah, 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 blah? And I just be like, I don't know what blah, 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 blah is. So I just can't answer the question. But if you ask me about something I know, I will do my best to give you an answer. That's the way it works here. And people love that. People love my answering their questions. And I know some people, they send me a question and they clip my answer. It's like, Caleb answered my question. I found a lot of videos on YouTube that are like that. So if you got a question on Marxism or geopolitics or whatever, just send us a super chat. We already got one about Ukraine. And we're ready to roll. Now, I believe we have another guest who's coming on, I think. 1 minute, that guest will be ready. But Ben, I did want to talk about, my book on Kamala Harris, right? I talked about, how, in a way, she's almost like psychologically programmed. This is the book that we put out on Kamala Harris. And, I talked about kind of the manipulation of trauma, right? And how, it's very clear that Kamala Harris and her father are not on good terms.
Not at all.
Yeah. Do you know about this?
Yeah. Her father was a Marxist professor. And if I'm not mistaken, he's actually denounced his daughter.
Yes. Kamala Harris's father is a Jamaican-born economics professor at the university, at Stanford University in California. And he went as far as denouncing Kamala Harris's presidential campaign because Kamala Harris went on The Breakfast Club, which is this popular morning radio show. And she was being interviewed and they asked her if she'd ever smoked weed. And her reply was, half my family's from Jamaica. What do you think? And her father, Donald, did not appreciate that.
Of course.
Did not appreciate that. And he really, I guess he was offended by the stereotype of a Jamaican as a I believe he said that as a pot smoking joy seeker. He really didn't like that stereotype. But then, and this is the crazy thing, you have to really dig to find it. But in this book, I quote it. It gets even more crazy because Donald Harris wrote this beautiful essay called Reflections of a Jamaican Father, which is very hard to find. And I dug it up. And in that essay, he talks about how he basically lost the ability to be his daughter's father in a custody battle. And in the custody battle, they played up the idea that he was from the islands, etc., and used these kind of stereotypes against him. Wow. So she was not just, when she offended him, it wasn't just like she was dissing her Jamaican heritage. She was like that. Those stereotypes have been used to take custody away from her father. Right. And you'll notice she rarely mentions her father. And when she does, it's just a passing mention. My father was an economics professor. Moving on. Right. But her mother, Kamala Harris's mother, is like a sainted icon. She can do no wrong. Yeah. I mean, her mother, Shmila Goplin, is just, I mean, there's no, I mean, she's like a saint. And you have to wonder what's going on there. What's going on there. And that in so many ways, Kamala Harris, she sees herself as a victim. Right. The world has been totally unfair to her. And that is what motivated her to just do vicious things as a prosecutor. When you think of yourself as a victim, you can just do anything, right? It gives you permission to harm other people because you're the victim. You know what I'm saying? That's how it works. And she basically, she saw herself as a victim. And, I mean, with the T-shirt, that little girl was me. It's all about little Kamala was victimized, and she was. I mean, she experienced racism in her school. She was one of the first classes to desegregate her school in California, and something happened with her father. I think there's more to it than just what we know about. But regardless, Kamala Harris sees herself as a victim. And that feeling of victimhood has given her permission to just, destroy the lives of other people. When she was a prosecutor in California, she jailed people for smoking weed. She destroyed the lives of thousands of people. She wanted to keep an innocent man on death row. I mean, that's called attempted murder in my book. You're trying to keep an innocent man on death row. That's called attempted murder. And there was a man who was going to be executed. And Kamala was just so excited to fry a bastard, that she tried to block DNA evidence being admitted. Now, you want to talk about unbelievable behavior. I mean, if someone's about to get the death penalty, wouldn't you want to make sure they were guilty of the crime? Wouldn't you want to make sure that DNA evidence was available? She tried to block DNA evidence. She was overruled by the California governor. They got the DNA evidence, and the individual is still in jail. Now, he is still in jail, but he is not on death row any longer. And I mean, when you look at that story, and I guess Kamala Harris was asked about this by the New York Times, and she said she feels bad about it. She tried to kill somebody, an innocent man, and she feels bad about it. She feels bad about it. So, I mean, this is who we're dealing with. This is a person who sees themselves as a victim. Is kind of what you can call like a sadistic narcissist, right? In her mind, she's a victim. The world was unfair to little Kamala. She's probably relived whatever her traumatic experiences are over and over and over again. So basically, other people are just kind of this blur in her, like her desire to get retribution or justification for whatever happened to her. And she is out there, and I mean, look, she understands. We saw her understanding of the Ukraine crisis is Russia is like a big country, and Ukraine is like a small country. So like Russia's attacking Ukraine, and that's like bad, man. And that's her understanding. This is a person who's one Joe Biden heart attack away from being president of the United States
and having their hands on the nuclear football.
I mean, yeah, and she's not well. I mean, she's really not well. Her staff has been resigning. I told people about this. I mean, I hate being right about so many things, but I wrote this book before she was elected. I said, this woman's unstable. She's dangerous. And I said this. A lot of people attacked me. They said, oh, that's so sexist, Caleb, and it's racist. And, oh, you're saying she's got daddy issues or whatever. Well, now it's come out. I mean, it is a fact. Her staff are resigning in droves. All the people who've worked with her, including Simone Sanders and others, have basically admitted that she subjects her her staff to vicious criticism. If you're on her staff, she just like tears people apart in front of other people. She refuses to get prepped for interviews because she's the great Kamala. Why would she need any prep? She's a sadistic narcissist. That's what I told you, right? I knew her better than she knew herself. So there you go. So now our next guest is going to be the great Lily Goldklang, who's going to come on and talk about various things. Lily, it actually slipped my mind what you're going to talk about. But come sit down. Come sit down, Lily. Come sit down. We got plenty to talk about. So what is it that you wanted to talk about? You were going to make a comment about something, right?
I didn't have anything specific. I mean, I guess kind of vaguely the reaction we've been getting online and kind of just how it irritates me. I mean, you've been in this longer than me, so maybe you've found a way to sort it out in your mind. But how do people just so straight-facedly like lie
Okay,
with
well,
a clear conscience.
first of all, you're talking about the reaction to the conference that we just had.
Conference, yeah.
Okay, summarize for me, because I haven't even seen all this. I just block people, mind you. If someone's like starts calling me a Nazi or calling me racist or whatever, I hit that block button. I am addicted to that block button. It's like block, and then they go away, right? And then they're not my problem, but then they're your problem. You have to deal with them.
Yeah.
So summarize what and I have seen an overwhelmingly positive reaction to our conference. I mean, the Russians who were there were moved almost to tears. All that's available at this point is just a single photograph. And that photograph has gone viral in the Donetsk People's Republic and all of that. So I'm seeing the positive reaction. I'm seeing like there was some, we talked about it yesterday, the person with the purple makeup who's like, they're nationalists, other than that. So what are they saying in this negative reaction?
Well, the negative reaction, you're right. It is a minority, but it's like, it's the typical stuff. We're fascist, we're Nazbols, we're not National Socialists, we're et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know. I'm trying to grapple with how do people lie like that's like with a clear conscience. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think, the great Peter Coffin, who spoke at our conference, one time he said, no one ever admits they're wrong on the internet. So I think that's part of it, right? Is that, people have just decided that this must be the case. Also, I think the definition of fascism is at this point so, ridiculous. I mean, it's like, what does fascism mean at this point? I mean, how can you be fascist for supporting a denazification operation?
Well, by fighting the fascists, you're the real fascist.
I guess. I mean, it's and I mean, it shows you how selective this is, because I mean, here in Ukraine, we have actual Nazi admirers who are tearing down World War II memorials. In Germany, the photos of the Azov battalion and the Ukrainian fighters, they have to like blur them because they're wearing like on their arm, they're wearing like the lightning bolt, which is a Nazi symbol. It's actually illegal in Germany. And so these actual Nazis who admire a Nazi collaborator, participant in the Holocaust, Stepan Bandera, these actual Nazis are being supported by the United States. They're fine with that. Yeah. But we are opposing that, and we're standing with Russia against that. And they've decided that, well, Russia is like killing people, so that's like Hitler. So Russia is fascist. And we are supporting Russia. No bones about it. We are definitely supporting Russia. Guilty as charged. Russia is absolutely right to protect the people of Donetsk and Lugansk, to break apart that Ukrainian military.
And the people supporting the Nazis in Ukraine are the exact same people who have been saying everyone's a Nazi the past, 10 years.
Yeah.
And now, I'm kind of pissed at them because they desensitize people to the word Nazi. It's like, now when I say, there's literal Nazis in Ukraine, people are like, oh, come on. But it's like, we didn't throw that word around lightly. And now we're actually using it because it applies and people are like,
Yeah, Trump supporters are Nazis. Leftists who use, the aesthetics of Marxism in the 20th century are Nazis. But people who tear down World War II memorials, people who admire Nazis and have torchlit parades for Nazis, people who form Nazi fighting divisions and use Nazi symbols, it's whatever.
I have a friend back in Boston who there was one of these Ukraine protests and there was the flag of the right sector, the black and red. Maybe anarchists might think it's theirs, but no. And a guy was waving the right sector flag, and my friend goes up to him. He says, "What flag is this?" And the guy, in an accent, he goes, "It's the flag of the army that defended Ukraine in World War II." It's like, what?
Defended Ukraine from
anti-fascism,
right? From the Soviet Union, from the people that were aligned with the United States. Yeah, but what else are people saying? What else is out there?
I mean, I don't know. It's just kind of the typical things they trot out.
Yeah. I heard somebody was telling me that somebody was claiming that we had a book by Alexander Dugin on the literature table. Now, I wouldn't be opposed. I mean, he's an important voice, but I mean, he's not our view. We're not Duginists, right? But we didn't. I mean, we did not have it. I mean, and there was the literature table that was the official CPI literature table. We had our books, that we put out, right? We had some Marxist classics.
We did.
We had Peter Coffin's 2 books that he put out, right? And then the LaRouche organization, they were there as well. They were like our friends, our guests. They had their own book table, but they don't like Dugin. They're not Dugin supporters. They're quite critical, and they wouldn't have Dugin stuff. So there was no Dugin book on our literature table. Now, oopsie daisy. That one's just not true. Also, it is, interesting fact. It is impossible to get Dugin's books in the United States because of the sanctions, right? Amazon has taken them all down. So if an actual Dugin book did exist on our literature table, that would be like an act of God, You know what I'm saying? Like that would be like a miracle that somebody subverted the U.S. sanctions, got a book, an actual, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I have a couple Dugin books, but I bought them like back in 2013, you know? Yeah, or I bought them in Russia, you know, when I was in Russia, but you cannot, Dugin's books are not available in the United States. He's on the sanctions list. Amazon will not carry them. You know, I mean, I've heard some people were able to get them on like eBay or something, used copies or something. But so if there were Dugin books there, that would be like amazing. That would be a huge feat, a huge accomplishment on our part. But there were not Dugin books. They were not. But I wouldn't be opposed to that kind of thing, right? And if people actually read Dugin, they would know that Dugin's not a Nazi, right? It's like this logic that like, it's like, so I'm a Nazi because I met with Dugin. Dugin's not a Nazi.
But someone said he is.
That someone said he is. If you actually read his book, The Fourth Political Theory, which is the Dugin book that I read that I probably got the most out of, it's the fourth political theory because he's opposed to both communism and fascism. He sees the liberal democracy and capitalism as the first political theory, communism as the second political theory, fascism as the third political theory, third position. And he's developing what he calls the fourth political theory, which is a combination of anti-capitalism and traditionalism and all kinds of stuff, which I don't agree with. I'm a believer in historical progress. One of the main points that Dugin makes in a lot of his books is that there is no historical progress, that the past, the present, the future are equal, right? That historical progress is a myth of the West that's been invented in order to justify imperialism, etc. I don't agree with that. Historical progress is like, look at this book. This is my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism. Do you see what's on the cover here? This is one of the fastest trains in the world in China right now, high-speed railway in China. Marxism and historical progress is like essential to my worldview. And I think the problem with imperialism is that it's holding back historical progress. So yeah, but I wouldn't be opposed to people reading one of the most important political theorists in Russia right now, you know. And Venezuelans told me I should read Dugin. When I was in Venezuela, Venezuelans told me to read Dugin. And when I was in Iran, the Iranians told me to read Dugin. So he's an important thinker. He's not a fascist. And we also didn't have his book on our table. So that one's we'll just throw that out. It's like, can they be more wrong about anything?
Well, to preserve freedom, they have to restrict freedom.
Right. You know, it's like, but the book wasn't there. The guy that they allege the book by is not a fascist. I mean, it's like, you know, and then the space aliens landed at our conference. And I mean, it's like they're just so, it's like they couldn't even come up with a good lie. Like, what? If they should make it up. They should make it up. We had like Hitler's writings on the table, right? Yeah. Then they would have gotten us. And then we would have to be like, no, there wasn't, produce a picture or whatever. Yeah. But in this case, like even if we did, that wouldn't, you know, it's just,
think about this.
Yeah.
We had Karl Marx's The Civil War in France.
Okay.
Take out that civil war in France. Who invaded France? The Nazis.
There you go. They got us.
Makes
they
sense.
got us. Yeah.
I wanted to snag that book, but it was gone by the time.
The Civil War in France. Well, it's all online. Marxist Internet Archive.
But,
so.
you know, there's something about having the
Yeah, well, Civil War in France, that's the book that Vosh quotes to lie. In my book, Red Tube Serves Imperialism, I quote that book a lot because he just lies. In that book, that's the famous quote from Karl Marx, the bourgeoisie, or what is it? The proletariat cannot simply seize hold of the ready-made state machinery. It's about the Paris Commune of 1871, this workers' uprising. He says the proletariat cannot simply seize control of the ready-made state machinery. So Vosh quotes that and is like, Marx wasn't a statist. Marx didn't want a government. It's like, no.
What about the word ready-made?
Yeah.
That's key.
And then he spends, and I quote in the Bread Tube book, like he spends paragraph after, I mean, the quotation, the block quote from Marx goes on for like 3 pages of Marx describing the new state institutions that the communards built, the workers' assemblies, the people's militias, the courts, he describes it in detail. So the idea that quote is Marx saying he doesn't want a state is the most outrageous lie. Anyone who looks at the context, he's saying we can't build it with a capitalist state, right? We can't just take control of the FBI and the CIA and the Pentagon and use them to create a socialist paradise in America. No, we'd have to create a new community police force and a new community, a new type of military and a new type of intelligence agency, right? That's what he's saying. He's not saying, no, I never want there to be any kind of state. He's saying that, no, we have to create a new state. And yes, the ultimate goal is a stateless, classless world based on vast material abundance.
I think with the whole military operation starting in Ukraine, speaking of Bosch, I think his operator flipped the switch and now he's gone full mask off. You know, now he's talking about the NATO anarchist galactic federation or something. And he says anarcho-Ukrainian nationalism is rising.
I think, Vosh should go back to video games. He should stick to the video games,
Well, he still does. He says before he gives his political analysis, like in a 10-minute video, he's like, I just got up. It's 3 p.m. I haven't showered. I really want to play video games, but I had to talk about this.
I still can't get over when he discovered on air who George Galloway was.
Yeah.
That was classic. George Galloway, probably the most famous socialist in Britain, who was a member of parliament, who was kicked out of the Labour Party for opposing the Iraq War, who is just like outspoken for Palestine, just a hero of the progressive people. And he's like watching a clip of me to learn why I'm bad. And he's like, wait, who's that? George Galloway. And he pulls up Wikipedia. He's learning from Wikipedia who George Galloway is. Why does anyone listen to this? Why does anyone listen to this fool about what socialism is? I mean, it's like, I mean, I expect him that's almost like on the level of like learning who Marx is from Wikipedia or something. It's like, if you know anything about the socialist movement in Britain, you're going to know who George Galloway is, love him or hate him. So, I mean, I've known who George Galloway is for a long time.
You got to respect him.
Right. His party was right. Vosh would not get that joke. But yes, after George Galloway was kicked out of the Labour Party, he started the Respect Party, which stood for responsibility, equality, socialism. I don't remember the rest, but it's the Respect Party it was called, right?
Prosperity.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, but I mean, and the other thing is that I first saw George Galloway speak in Cleveland. I think it was 2010, maybe earlier. And it was this event, this huge Arab American event to support Palestine that took place in Cleveland. And George Galloway came in and he had just gone to Gaza. He had broken the blockade and gone to Gaza. And it was like he got standing ovation after standing ovation after standing ovation. And I was in the audience. And at one point, and he was talking about, he was being optimistic about Obama. He said, you just had a very important election in the United States. You elected Barack Obama. The last president you had the excuse of being an idiot. But, Barack Obama is a smart man. He has no excuse. It was good. It was a good talk. And then he said he was going back to Gaza and he was bringing with him his friend, the Venezuelan president. And then the whole room, thousands of people, Arab Americans, started chanting Chavez, Chavez, Chavez. It was really amazing. It was really, really amazing. That was just after the Lebanese resistance forces had defeated Israel. And I maintain that the Obama presidency, it was an attempt to kind of derail. There was like this huge upsurge of anti-Israel, anti-imperialism in the Middle East, right? The Lebanese resistance were kind of the heroes of all enemies of Zionism. And at that point, Obama came in, and his middle name is Hussein. And it was an attempt to kind of derail it. I compare Obama. I said, Barack Obama is like a 21st century Napoleon. Because Napoleon, when he tried to conquer Syria and Egypt, put up posters everywhere claiming to be a Muslim. But he wasn't.
Like the Thermidor. I'm like, what was the revolution?
No.
Okay.
Napoleon pretended to be a Muslim to conquer the Arab peoples. He put up posters. And that's what Barack Obama was doing. Barack Obama was basically faking out the Arab world. Look, here's a guy who can understand you. He went to a Muslim school in Indonesia. His middle name's Hussein. He's your friend. Look, Netanyahu hates him, even though he's like giving Netanyahu everything he wants. But they have this like Twitter war going on. It was a psyop. That's what I'm convinced that the Obama presidency was. Barack Obama was a psyop. And I'm going to talk about that. I'm now that this conference is over, I'm slowing down a little bit. I'm going to get back to writing. I've been working. I'm going to have a new book. A new book. I can't say too much about it, but there's a new book that's going to be coming out. I'm going to get back to writing, and it's been a while since I've been writing. But I'm going to get back to writing, and I did a lot of research on Barack Obama, and it's unbelievable. So here's just a little tidbit of information about Barack Obama. So Barack Obama's father, general in the Indonesian military, a stepfather, right? His actual father is from Kenya, but he grew up, a lot of his childhood is in Indonesia. At the time he was running for president, all we heard about was, he went to a Muslim school. Oh my God, he went to a Muslim school. Like it's Indonesia. He's going to go to a Muslim school. It's a Muslim country, okay? Like that's not the point. Mm-hmm. But his father, Lolo Sutoro, was a leader of the Indonesian military. What happened in Indonesia in 1965?
Sukarno was overthrown and Suharto was instated.
Yeah, there was a military coup where the U.S. government aligned and the CIA toppled. They used the military to topple the Indonesian government. And they started out, the CIA supplied the names of all the members of the Indonesian Communist Party, and they started slaughtering them. And then there was just so much ethnic hatred in Indonesia for the ethnic Chinese who were supporters of the Communist Party, that it went from being just a slaughter of communists to a genocide of the ethnically Chinese people. 1965, 500,000 people are slaughtered. Like the rivers, like the canalways near the capital in Indonesia were clogged with dead bodies. It was just this horrendous massacre. So Barack Obama's father, his stepfather, was a leader of this military that was carrying out slaughtering communists, carrying out a coup, and then and going on to commit genocide against ethnically Chinese people. That should have been the story, not, oh my God, he went to a Muslim school. No, it wasn't. That was not the story. The story was that Barack Obama's father was tied to that. And on top of that, what is Obama's mother, Ann Dunham, right? Yeah, that was Barack Obama's mother, right? She's this academic. She lived in Hawaii or whatever. Why does some academic in Hawaii marry like a general in the Indonesian military?
The story is glowing very much.
Yeah, I mean, is that what people in Hawaii do that all the time, right? They just marry like high-ranking military officials in other countries, right?
Well, maybe she wanted a little adventure, little.
I mean, something's going on there. And she was working for the Ford Foundation. That's who her employer was in Indonesia, the Ford Foundation. So she's. Yeah. So it's like you're starting, the more you look into this, the more you realize, And then on top of that, Barack Obama, after he graduates, he's at Harvard, he's at Columbia. After he graduates, his first employer is something called the International Business Corporation. IBC, which, by the way, International Business Corporation. Can you think of a more of a bland name? It's like you're trying to invent something that's just completely bland. Well, the International Business Corporation is this foundation that just goes around the world, goes to developing countries, Africa, Asia, the Pacific Islands, other places, putting on workshops about how important the free market is and encouraging free trade and the free market in developing countries. Mm-hmm. That was his first job, is he just went around and doing these workshops about the importance of free market capitalism.
What are a philanthropist?
Yeah. I mean, that's his first corporation. I mean, it's you can get into that, and people want to get conspiratorial and all that, but it's like, I mean, you look at Barack Obama. Barack Obama was not Jesse Jackson. All right, Jesse Jackson, he made a lot of compromises and stuff, but he was an actual civil rights leader. Barack Obama, from day one, glowed in the dark, like you might say. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, Barack Obama glowed in the dark unbelievably, and his presidency was one of the most crazy psyops. Could you imagine what would have happened if the Arab Spring happened with George W. Bush as president,
or John McCain,
or Trump as president?
Oh my God!
If Barack Hussein Obama had not been president of the United States in 2011, when the Middle East lit up like a Christmas tree, things would have very, very much been different. I think Iran and the resistance forces in the Middle East would have been the main beneficiaries of the upsurge. But instead, due to the fact that Barack Obama was there, and due to the fact that Al Jazeera, the TV network from Qatar that is like the voice of the Muslim Brotherhood, basically.
They're also like liberals, kind of.
Yeah. That they were kind of key in pushing the Arab Spring. Due to that being the situation, due to that reality, you had a situation where the Arab Spring ultimately benefited the United States, right? And that was absolutely necessary, and that's what was going on. So, and the other thing is, I was a member of the Workers' World Party at the time. And the Workers' World Party at that point had a relationship with John Conyers, was
Democrat.
Yeah. I mean, we never voted for Democrats, but he came to one of our anti-war meetings. He would sometimes speak at anti-war rallies and stuff. I remember John Conyers was urging everyone. He came to an anti-war planning meeting for McCowie, the Michigan Emergency Committee Against War and Injustice, which is like a Workers' World anti-war protest group, basically. And he showed up at the meeting. We're like, damn, this is a member of Congress who just came to our meeting. It was like a surprise visit. And he he basically just urged us all to vote for Obama. And this is what he said. He said, it's not just here in America that people are unhappy because of the economic crisis. It's also in the Middle East. And a lot of these Middle Eastern countries, America is backing the dictators. So eventually, when people are hungry, what do? They go out and riot. So we need there to be a man in the White House who can relate to those Middle Eastern people when they rise up. So basically, John Conyers spilled the beans to us in 2008 in the Workers' World Party office at the McCowie meeting. I'm sitting there, and I look back on that, and I'm like, damn, you know what I mean? Like, John Conyers, member of Congress, he must have gotten his briefing, his orientation. I was basically told, what the purpose of the Obama presidency was. And I think, part of the reason, I remember there was all this anger, they called it like the Pumas, right? Party unity, my ass, all these people who wanted Hillary Clinton, not Obama. I think the anger was really about the fact that, Hillary Clinton had been picked, but then the crisis in the Middle East, some people said, no, we have to have Obama. And then what's even crazier is for the first 4 years of Obama's presidency, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, Obama wasn't running the foreign policy of the United States. Hillary Clinton was, even though she wasn't president. Basically, she was the one. She had her team picked out. She was running the foreign policy. In 2009, when the government of Honduras was overthrown, they asked Barack Obama about the coup in Honduras in 2009. And he said, well, that's not legal. He didn't know the United States had done it, that Hillary Clinton had met with the coup plotters ahead of time. Well, that's legal. You know, I mean, and the right wing got mad. Oh my God, Obama's, you know, supporting a dictator, and all. Like, the right wing got all hoity-toity, but it was simply an honest mistake. Obama had not been briefed about what the Hillary Clinton State Department was doing in Honduras.
And like, do you remember from the 2008 primary when it was pretty clear Hillary had no chance and Obama was going to beat her? And someone's like, why are you still saying it? She's like, well, look what happened to Bobby Kennedy after he won California. And she was like, he was assassinated after he won the California primary, which is like, wow. What the what?
Yeah.
Like, she's like, he could get assassinated.
Wow.
You didn't know about? You never heard of that?
I have not heard about that. That's eerie. I mean, that's like on the level of like Secret Service visits your house type of comment.
Yeah, but she said it on like national television.
Wow. That is wild. I did not remember that. I do remember the funny thing was, I mean, it was kind of sad. Funny is not the right word, but Bill Clinton was trying to like downplay Barack Obama's electoral victories. And he said, well, it was like in South Carolina or something that Obama had won. And he said, well, Jesse Jackson won there too. And people are like, oh,
wow.
Yeah, they took it as kind of a racial comment. But I mean, the thing was the Jesse Jackson campaign in the 1980s, right? That was different. All right. Now, I mean, in a lot of ways, yes, it was the Democratic Party and it was, but it was like Jesse Jackson was running on a platform of like sympathy with Palestinians, get rid of nuclear weapons, peace with the USSR. I mean, he was running.
It was the real deal.
Yeah. I mean, he sold out in a lot of ways. Since then, he's really kind of moved to the right. But
his 88, what are you talking about? 88?
His 84 campaign, was kind of a left-wing campaign, in a lot of ways. It really was. And that's, Barack Obama, I mean, he was like the only prominent African-American leader who had like no ties to the civil rights movement, no ties to grassroots movements. And they make a big deal out of him being a community organizer. But if you look at him, he was a Ford Foundation guy.
That's the community.
Yeah, he was Acorn. And in a lot of ways, what he was doing was he was kind of like spying on leaders of the Black community in Chicago. Like, I mean, it's like you look at his history in Chicago, he was not a community organizer. And his first campaign for Congress was to the right. He ran against Bobby Rush. Bobby Rush was a former Black Panther. And he didn't run against him to the left, ran against him to the right. It was Bobby Rush was this former leader of the Black Panthers that worked with Fred Hampton, but he really kind of mellowed out and become kind of, but Bobby Rush was running and they ran Obama. And that's when he first won the election. They ran him to the right against Bobby Rush. So, it was very clear that Obama was not a progressive. And it's really funny because there's this whole narrative that you get about Barack Obama, the right wing, where it's like Barack Obama, is a communist, his campaign's paid for by Moscow Gold and Bernardine Dorn, Bill Ayers. And it's all so ridiculously stupid. You know what I mean? Anyone who knows anything about local politics in Chicago knows that guy has been with the machine from the beginning. He's not even from Chicago. They sent him there, basically. And it's a whole wild story, but anyway, that's kind of a tangent. What else is on your mind today, Lily?
I mean, you were talking about it with Tom, I saw, but the bioweapons, they're not bioweapons, they're biological research facilities, but if Russia gets them, then they're bioweapons. How does that work?
I don't know. I really don't know.
I mean, it's like, I sound so cliche. I feel like we're going back to 2016, but it's like George Orwell, 1984. As much as I don't like Orwell.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like how the USA only gives defensive weapons to Saudi Arabia.
Right. Defense from Yemen.
Yeah, that's all they give.
Threat.
Yeah, they don't give offense. They're not helping Saudi Arabia kill the Yemenis. They're only giving them defensive weapons. And do you know the difference between an offensive gun and a defensive gun? I don't. I think they look the same.
They're the same.
It was. I've heard. I don't forget who said this, but it was like I feel like they should change the Department of the Defense back to the War Department. I feel like that would be more honest. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it really would be. I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous in so many ways. But at the same time, I was wondering, when it comes to these biological labs, are they actually going to use this? Are they going to say that? Right? Because someone could just get the flu.
Yeah.
Right. Someone in Ukraine just has to someone in Kiev has to go start coughing. And immediately they're going to blame Russia for it. I mean, it's like
Russia unleashes COVID super.
Right. I mean, it's based on nothing.
Yeah.
That is kind of utterly terrifying to me in a lot of ways.
They've attacked Donetsk, Ukraine just struck Donetsk, I believe, today, and it killed most civilians of any attack in the whole conflict so far.
Yeah, and I tweeted about this, and people are, people are just, they don't care. U.S. media does not care.
Right. You're heartless if you don't support Ukraine, but if you don't support, Donbass, well, that's just CNN. You're a good person.
Absolutely. Well, I am just exhilarated by that conference that we had. I wish the video could be done sooner, but they're doing their best. Peter, the guy who recorded it, is doing a great job. I know he filmed it. We had 2 cameras, and it's a lot of work. So I'm being patient, and I'm excited to get back to writing. And
you can't blame 8 hours of footage.
And 8 hours of footage is a long time.
Yeah.
And one thing I am planning to do is I'm going to post all the international or the greetings we got. Right.
Yeah.
So we got greetings from George Galloway, from Tara Reid, Joe Biden's rape victim, right? Who's a great journalist and writer, very brave. I mean, I've had the opportunity to have conversations with her. She is amazing. I've been on her podcast. Joe Terrar, Communist Party, Great Britain Marxist Leninist. Mount, isn't it? It's CPGBML.
I was wondering, what is it? So there's a Communist Party of Britain. And
yes.
Then why is it why don't they just do Communist Party of Britain Marxist?
I think Great Britain refers to so there's Britain, right? But then like Greater Britain refers to like Northern Ireland and stuff. That's what I think, but I don't know. You should ask them.
Sure.
Right. And they've kind of decided they're going to rebrand. They're just the communists. That's how they call themselves. But yeah, and it gets a little bit confusing. I mean, people talk about People's Front of Judea. There's there's the Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain, Marxist Leninist, and that's Bainesites. They're followers of Hardiel Baines.
The Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain, Marxist Leninist.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And then there's the Communist Party of Britain, CPB.
Yeah.
And then there's also CPGB.
Without ML?
Yeah, there's CPGB, which I believe is like a Trotskyite grouping or something.
I didn't know that. I thought that was the name of the old party.
Yeah, but CPB is just like the regular. It's like, I guess the original, the actual British Communist Party broke into 3 factions at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. So one of the factions that's around is called CPB, and that's the one that's generally it's like CPUSA here.
Yeah,
and then
they're a little bit better.
Well, I mean, it's not hard to be better than the CPUSA, but and then there's another group called CPGB, and it's like some trots who I don't know, they're like
they took the old name because that was Harry Pollitt and all that.
It's some kind of weird Trotskyite regroupment, I guess, is CPGB. Maybe they're not around anymore. They used to be, right? And then there was for a long time there's the Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain, which was a trot group, and then there's and then there's that Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain, Marxist Leninist.
That was Cornelius Cardew, the famed musician. Me and Caleb,
Yeah. Oh, we love Cardew. We're huge Cardew fans here.
Cardew heads.
Yes, and then there's the CPGBML, right? So there you go. With the great Harpal Brar. That's one thing about this conference is it's kind of slowed down. I was doing those weekly interviews and chats with Harpal Brar. We're going to resume that next week. So
yeah, Harpal's great.
He's really great. He's just a genius. A brilliant mind of the working class. I've done 4 conversations with him so far, and they're just dynamic. But yeah, so there's Joe T. And then we spoke with, we had a message from Max Blumenthal. Great message from Max Blumenthal. We had a message. Who else did we have a message from? Am I forgetting somebody? So Jody, Tara, George, Max,
Chris
Alali, right? The communist candidate for city council. And it's for Congress, right? And then it's David Cedillo, who, because Chris Alali announced in his video that he's actually going to run for Congress again, got huge applause. And then David Cedillo, at the end of his speech about Nicaragua, he said that he's planning to run for city council.
Yes,
so
sir.
we basically had 2 major announcements of candidacies at our event.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. That is huge. I keep saying that this event is historic, right? That people are going to look back on this and they're going to say, wow, in the middle of the war, the war hysteria over here and the anti-Russian hysteria in Austin, Texas, in the heartland of America, communists gathered and unfurled the Donetsk People's Republic flag. And, and under the threats of red guards, of Maoist frat boy associations, and Ukrainians and Voshites, and everyone was out to get us. We had heavy security, and we had our event, and we did it. And the whole world was watching this conference. I mean, yesterday our numbers on this stream was it was huge because everyone wanted to know what happened. And when those videos come out, people are just chomping at the bit to see what we did because this was a big deal, right? This is a big deal. And the crazy thing is I remember when the USA was attacking Libya, right? When the USA was attacking Libya, my former boss, U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, Cynthia McKinney, esteemed congresswoman of the Green Party and others, they had an event at Riverside Church because, you know, at that time, anti-imperialist forces had to get together and support Libya. So there was just a big event at Riverside Church. But this time, you know, the USA is whipping up hysteria. There's a war in Ukraine. Where was the anti-imperialist meeting? I didn't see one at Riverside Church.
CPUSA said give peace a chance.
Yeah, CPUSA is basically neutral. They're saying abolish NATO, but they're more or less neutral.
Yeah.
Right? And like, where was the big anti-imperialist meeting? We did it. It was us. I mean, that's us. You know, what the Peace Council used to do, we're doing. You know, what the International Action Center used to do, we're doing. Right? What the Answer Coalition used to do, we're doing.
Yep.
I mean, we are taking on this role. We are the anti-imperialist voices in America. I think that's something to be proud of.
It's hard to do it now that, you know, it was easy to take an anti-imperialist position, you know, kind of socially when the U.S. was winning. And now the U.S. is losing. And there's this huge social pressure to support, you know, Ukraine and the America. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's particularly outrageous. But, you know, we got to stand up to the lies. And we did it. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of Russians came and were moved, deeply moved by our ceremony. And a lot of people were there. And I mean, it was just a really positive event. I'm really, really glad we did it. I can't wait till the video's online so people can see what we had to say. It's going to be awesome. So anything else you want to say, Lily, before you go and I start answering these questions?
Tell Sophie from Mars to debate me.
Yes. Yes. Sophie from Mars, please debate Lily.
Yeah, no, please.
Do you promise not to bring up her eyebrows?
Caleb, you just brought it up.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind. Well, there you go. You know, no holds barred, I guess.
No holds barred.
No holds barred. Okay. Yeah. Sophie from Mars. There we go. All right. Debate Lily. Sophie from Mars, debate Lily. You've heard it. If you don't do it, you're
surrendering.
You're surrendering. You're surrendering. How's that? That'll work. All right. You're surrendering if you don't do it. All right, Lily. Well, thank you very much. Always fun to talk with you. And now we're going to answer some of the questions that people have. And then keep the questions rolling in, folks, because that's what we're here to do. We're doing the 20 questions thing I do at the end of my streams. We're just going to do that. We can't do the roll call today because then I'd be like looking at the screen and that would be all crazy, but we'll get back to that. Trust me, we're not going to be in Texas forever. So I'll be back, you know, running it myself and we can do that, but we'll just answer the questions. So we got how many here? We got 6. So if you want me to answer a question, now is the time to send a super chat. Ben will add it to the stream. So first question, what were you read the question?
Sure. What was Lenin's thoughts on Ukraine?
Lenin was all about the right of nations to self-determination. That was a central plank of Bolshevik policy. Classical Marxism says that, you know, workers of the world unite and opposes all national divisions. In Marx's late life, he was starting to revise that position. Marx supported the Irish people in their struggle for national liberation against the British. Marx started supporting Polish independence movements. And so based on that, you know, Lenin updated Marxism and came out with his thesis on the right of self-determination, arguing that oppressed nations have the right to fight for their independence and that oppressed nations, because they're fighting for their independence, their nationalism is not inherently reactionary. Rosa Luxemburg and a lot of other Marxists said that all nationalism is inherently reactionary. Lenin said, no, nationalism of the oppressed is good. So when the Bolsheviks took power in Russia, they began granting autonomy to the different peoples throughout the former Russian Empire, and the Ukrainians, the Moldovans, you know, the Lithuanians, the Latvians, they got their own territory and they got their own written language. And, you know, if it weren't for the Bolsheviks and it weren't for that policy, a lot of these people would never have had the opportunity to learn to write their own language and to speak their own language. And, you know, emphasizing the languages of oppressed nationalities and national minorities, that was a huge part of Lenin's theory. And what's interesting is that is kind of, Putin has consistently said that he feels Lenin overdid that by doing that, Lenin kind of planted the seeds of division in the territories of the former USSR. You know, and I think Putin might be right about that. I don't know. I'm not there. I would never want to tell a Ukrainian or a Belarusian or somebody from that region that they're not a separate nation or whatever. But basically, a lot of Russians feel that, you know, that some of these nationalities are not full-on separate nationalities. It's just a regional difference. Like Belarus is white Russia. right? Right. So it's got Russia in the name. It's just a region. They called it the White Russia and Ukraine. Why did they always call it the Ukraine? Because until the Russian Revolution, until the Bolsheviks created the Ukrainian Soviet Republic, it was just considered a region in the Russian Empire. It was the Ukraine. We got White Russia. You can go to White Russia. You can go to the Ukraine. Well, Lenin came along and he said, no, we're going to give a border to all these national territories. And Putin feels like by doing that, he set the seeds of division. And what's interesting is the USA during the Cold War was always playing up the idea of great Russian chauvinism, the idea that the Russians were kind of the oppressors, the Soviet Union was the new Russian Empire. But when they took the vote to dissolve the Soviet Union, this is something that, again, no one talks about. They took a vote on whether or not to dissolve the Soviet Union. The vote to keep the Soviet Union was actually higher in Ukraine and in Belarus and in Kazakhstan than it was in Russia. More Russians wanted to dissolve the Soviet Union than national minorities did, which nobody talks about, right? And the reason for that was that these countries, their connection with the Soviet Union had been the basis of their economies, right? These were very small countries, and if they were not part of the Soviet Union and they were not part of a central Soviet economy, it would devastate them economically. And it did. The fall of the Soviet Union was a disaster in Russia, but it was really a disaster in Ukraine. In the 1990s, there were cities in Ukraine that only had electricity for like 3 or 4 hours a day. That's how bad it was in Ukraine. And that the fall of the Soviet Union devastated a lot of these smaller republics. It just devastated them economically. So yes, modern Ukraine, the borders were drawn by Lenin. Stalin expanded those borders to include the Donbass, I believe, right? Lenin's original Ukraine did not include the Donbass region. Stalin expanded it to include the Donbass. And it was actually Khrushchev who added Crimea to Ukraine. And Khrushchev himself was Ukrainian, and that was kind of a backroom deal, right? The idea was that there's a huge military base in Crimea. So if Crimea is included in Ukraine, then Ukraine gets more benefits as a result of that. And it didn't really matter because they were all the Soviet Union anyway. It was kind of like redrawing, separating West Virginia from Virginia. That doesn't change the United States at all, right? But you have to remember, like, okay, so it's like, where is the line? When does it become a separate nation? Right? Because here in the United States, we're all quote unquote settlers, right? Except for the Native Americans, all of our ancestors came over. And so it's not the same. But these peoples in Eurasia, they've all been living together for 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years. So there's all kinds of long, complicated history there. It's not the same, right? And so it's like when you have regions where the people speak a certain dialect or their language is slightly different, or they're historically Muslim rather than Christian, or they do this different. Where do you draw the line of what is a nation and what isn't? Right. And it goes to show you that at the end of the day, the nation state, as we come to know it, that doesn't come into existence until the Treaty of Westphalia. And it's a particularly new thing in human history. And so where do you draw the line in Eurasia of what constitutes a nation and what doesn't, right? And obviously these people that were not considered to be Russians or Muscovites, right, or whatever, that's, they were discriminated against historically in the Tsarist Empire, et cetera. So it's complicated. And my answer about that is I don't know. I'm not Russian, okay? But I'm telling you, Lenin was trying to correct the historical injustices. He was trying to grant autonomy to these regions, help these people develop their own language and their own autonomy. Originally, the Soviet Union had a house of nationalities. They had the Supreme Soviet, which was just like by population, but just kind of like in the United States, how every state has like 2 senators. They had this thing called the House of Nationalities, where every nationality got like equal representation, right? And then Stalin eventually abolished the House of Nationalities when he reformed the Soviet Constitution, because it didn't make sense to have very, very tiny republics have the same number of seats. And actually, one little interesting thing is that the Soviet Union, many people don't know about this, created a Jewish autonomous region because their feeling was that Jews constituted a nation that, just suffered discrimination. And so they created the Jewish autonomous region. There's a whole history there. And we see the super chats. He's writing them down. So yeah, that's really what Stalin's view of Ukraine, or Lenin's view of Ukraine was. And it's certainly relevant in this. And it goes to show you that it's like, history, it's like you correct one mistake and then it creates a new mistake, and then you got to correct that, and that creates a new mistake. That's how these things kind of work. And is it possible that Lenin overdid it on the right of self-determination for nationalities? The tradition that I come out of, the Sam Marcy tradition, would say no, would say that Sam Marcy, his book Perestroika, he argues that the Soviet Union didn't emphasize national differences enough. But the writer Grover Furr, who's a widely, among communists read historian, who's like, a defender of Stalin in some ways, He argues that actually the opposite, that he argues more what Putin argues, which is interesting because he's not a pro-Putin guy by any means. But he argues that Stalin emphasizing the national question was detrimental to the Soviet Union, led to their downfall. So I don't know. And neither Sam Marcy nor Grover Furr was Russian. Sam Marcy was Ukrainian by birth, but he didn't live there. He moved out when he was 4. He left Ukraine for the United States. My answer is I don't know. I'm not from there. And I mean, that the last thing that the people in that part of the world need is me to come over and start declaring people to be nations or not nations. So I humbly, as an American, say I don't know. But that's kind of the Ukrainian national question is pretty important in this ongoing thing. And that's kind of why it's important and why to bring it up. And I guess that's an answer to your question. So I guess what's the next question we got?
Next question. Do sanctions hurt Russia? What is the benefit of large corporations pulling out of the country?
Okay, so sanctions do hurt Russia. Sanctions cost lives. I mean, sanctions are economic warfare, right? I mean, the fact that Russia, they can't, I think they can't use YouTube in Russia. They can't, they can't, it's like nothing. Coca-Cola, it's like, it hurts Russia right now, the ability to import products, the ability to not make bank transfers, and that's devastating their economy. No question about it. It's hurting them. The sanctions on Russia are bad. And they've harmed Russia. Now, the individual corporations, though, that's virtue signaling, right? Now, that's not sanctions. That's corporations, private companies on their own deciding we're not going to do business with Russia. That's just advertising. They want there to be a news item about it. And I wonder when this dies down, how many of them will very quietly reverse the policy. But right now, everyone's, virtue signaling about how much they love Ukraine. But I don't think there's any benefit for individual corporations in this. It's just other than they get the headline, oh, look what a good corporation they are. That's what everyone's trying to outdo each other. But sanctions do hurt people. I mean, when I was in Ecuador for the World Festival of Youth and Students, and he's writing down your super chat. When I was in Ecuador for the World Festival of Youth and Students, I met a young man from Cuba who was in a wheelchair. He was in a wheelchair because the medicine that he would need to treat his genetic condition was unavailable under the blockade with Cuba. When I was in Iran, I met a guy who really wanted to be an airline pilot, and he couldn't be an airline pilot because of the sanctions, that block airplane parts. They only have so many airplanes in Iran because they can't get airplane engines because of the sanctions. So sanctions do destroy them. The sanctions on Venezuela have killed, I believe, like 5,000 to 6,000 people, if I'm not mistaken.
Far more than that.
Far more than that,
Far
according
more
to you.
than that. Yes, the number from 2017 to 2019 was 40,000, and there are some estimates that since then the number has increased to over 100,000.
Wow. I mean, it's like, so sanctions, they sound benign, right? They're an act of war, but they're an act of war in reality is what they are. So there you go. All right, next question.
Can you talk about the imminent global alignment of BRICS countries?
Okay, so BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And at one point they were talking about having their own currency, and then they kind of backed away from it, but they still have talks. It is a body, right? Just like we have NATO, which is a body, just like we have the European Union, which is a body, just like we have the Eurasian Economic Union of Russia, it's a body. We have the Belt and Road Initiative, the Belt and Road, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. It is an international grouping, and it does not include the United States or any European country, right? So because, unless you consider Russia a European country, which it's complicated, right? They're definitely not part of the European Union. They're definitely not part of NATO. So the BRICS is an alternative body, and they trade with each other. They have special trade relationships. They're talking about having their own currency, kind of backed away from it. And yes, they're going to keep emerging. And the more sanctions that get put on Russia and China, the more that alliances like this are going to become important. The other thing to remember about the BRICS countries, so, you got Russia and China, two like anti-imperialist countries. You got India, not really anti-imperialist. I mean, Modi is more independent than who was there before, but it's still, they're pretty aligned with the United States, especially against China. You got, South Africa, again, it comes out of a kind of a Marxist-led anti-apartheid struggle, but in a lot of ways, the USA, they don't really challenge U.S. economic power and stuff. But then, and then you've got Brazil. Right. And Brazil, they kind of, they had a social democratic government. Now they have Bolsonaro, who's very right wing. They did vote recently to condemn Russia at the United Nations. However, in their speech that they made, they condemned the fertilizer sanctions on Russia because the fertilizer that Russia exports to Brazil is vital. If they don't get that Russian fertilizer, they won't be able to grow crops, and people in Brazil will starve. And as Bolsonaro is a total puppet of the United States, I mean, just a total puppet of the United States. However, even the Bolsonaro government in Brazil recognizes how economically tied Brazil is to Russia. And obviously Lula da Silva and the socialists there are much more tied to Russia than Bolsonaro is. But even under Bolsonaro, they can't totally just jump on the bandwagon against Russia. They have to, on some level, criticize the sanctions because their economy is Russian. I've been to Brazil. I spoke at a conference, an amazing conference of the Trade Union Center. I gave a talk about oil price manipulation. It was during the crisis. I was invited there when they were, removing Dilma Rousseff from office during the impeachment, basically. And at that trade union conference I went to, it was a conference of trade unionists from Brazil. Most of them were supporters of Bolivarianism and socialism. Members of the Brazilian Senate spoke there, et cetera. A number of Russians were there, because Russia's economic relationship with Brazil is very deep at this point. So that's what you have to remember. The same with India. Again, Modi he's more independent, but he's not an anti-imperialist. He's not a socialist. He's not a Marxist. He's not, it's not an anti-imperialist state by any means, but Russia does a lot of business there. And, China used to, now they've kind of thrown down against China, but they're not willing to fully throw down against Russia. They've been neutral in this whole Ukraine situation. So, BRICS is an interesting development. We shall see what happens next. What's next? What's the next question?
The next question. What is the Marxist position on authoritarian versus liberal and nationalist versus globalist divisions?
Okay, well, first of all, both of those designations, authoritarian and nationalist, are kind of fake. They really are. So authoritarian versus liberal, right, is the first dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
And nationalist versus globalist. Okay, well, first of all, authoritarianism is the result of scarcity. When a society is underdeveloped, when there is instability in a country, you are going to have a level of authoritarianism. If you go to any developing country, I don't care what their politics are, if you go to any impoverished country around the world, one thing that people will always tell you is don't call the cops, right? I mean, if you go to, you go to South America, you go to Asia, you go to Africa, people will always say, don't call the cops, because in a developing country, those cops are going to want to bribe. Here in the United States, you try to bribe a cop, you're going to jail for bribery. But in developing countries, when the cops show up, if you don't bribe them, they're going to find something, because they're in that for a bribe. They don't get paid enough. And it's just kind of this, you have much more blatant, rule by the barrel of a gun. And so the cops show up, they're going to want to bribe. And so they always say, never call the police in a developing country, right? In developing countries, often, the state is under much more threat. There's more instability in society. There's more drug gangs. There's more terrorist groups. There's more poverty. There's more instability. So you're going to have a higher level of authoritarianism. And that's for any country in the developing world. That the road to freedom is economic development. And when countries become more prosperous and more stable, they have a higher level of freedom. No one on the planet Earth was talking about human rights and freedom of speech and freedom of religion until like the 1400s in Europe. And was that because people were just evil until then? People were just evil. And then suddenly in the 1400s, they woke up and said, maybe people should have freedom. Of course not. It was no society had achieved the level of development. And with the emergence of like modern capitalism in Europe, you started to have people coming out and saying, well, maybe we should have freedom of speech. Maybe we should have freedom of assembly, right? And that the relationship between authoritarianism and economics must be understood. The way we talk about authoritarianism, human rights in the West, it's always framed as a moral issue. There's good countries that have freedom. There's bad countries that don't have it. And even that narrative is hypocritical, because we know there's a lot of quote unquote bad countries the U.S. is aligned with, like Saudi Arabia, the absolute monarchies in the Middle East, like Nigeria, where they slaughtered the Shia Muslim community. There are many authoritarian countries the USA backs. So even that narrative is not honest, but that narrative itself doesn't get to the essence of it, that the road to liberty and freedom is the road of economic development. And if you look at China, for example, if you look at during the Mao years, they were much more authoritarian than they are now. There's way more freedom of speech in China now than there was during the Mao years. There's way more freedom of religion in China now than there was during the Mao years. And why is that? Because China was so much poorer. And when you're a poor country, when you're unstable, poverty necessitates authoritarianism. Whereas economic development is the road to freedom. The reason in the United States that we're able to get on here and make these streams, we might not be able to for much longer, but the reason we're able to make these streams, the reason I'm able to say what I'm saying is because the USA is stable enough that there's no danger of people who agree with me, taking over control of the government. There's no danger of that, right? The USA is a stable society. We're not on the brink of civil war or revolution, and people are not deeply impoverished. And so there's no need for the state to crack down on me. But if we were in an impoverished country, where there was instability, where there was extreme amount of poverty, and people like me talking this way could potentially lead to, instability, it would be a necessity for whoever was in power to silence people like us. And that's what people don't understand, is that freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, these things are directly related to development and economics. And that's that first one about authoritarian versus liberal, right? And that I would like every society to be totally free. And ultimately, the goal is to have a world with so much abundance and prosperity, we don't need a government at all. That's the ultimate goal, right? Is a world with so much prosperity and abundance that the state itself can fade away. People can kind of just do what they want, right? But the road to that is socialism and all of that. But ultimately, I want a society that's so quote unquote liberal or so open that people can just do whatever they want. I mean, even beyond the freedoms we have here in the West. So that's how I view that question. Now, the other one is about nationalism versus globalism. Well, there is a global economy. There is a global economy. There's no getting around that. No country can just put up a wall and isolate itself from the rest of the world. However, that global economy is not fair. And that global economy, it impoverishes countries in the developing world, and increasingly it's impoverishing the first world. There are, if you want to talk about globalists, there are institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. There's neoliberalism, which is a model of global trade that is making the world poorer and making certain wealthy corporations and monopolies wealthier, right? And so when right-wingers call Jeff Bezos or George Soros or Bill Gates globalists, what they're saying is that these are super international oligarchs who are enriching themselves by making the world poorer. And I'm against that. So if that's what being anti-globalist means, that's what I'm against. And then when you say nationalist, what does nationalist mean? Well, no country is going to be able to cut itself off. However, countries like Nicaragua, countries like Russia, countries like Venezuela, they want to be part of the global economy, but they say we're not just going to roll over and do what the IMF and the World Bank says. We're going to participate in the global economy on our terms, right? We're going to demand fair trade. We're going to protect our own industries. We're going to regulate our own economies, and we're not going to have to go to the World Trade Organization and beg for the right to pass a new, minimum wage law. So are they nationalists in that sense? They wouldn't call themselves nationalists. They would just say we're socialists. We're protecting our people. So if nationalism means, regulating your economy in a way that benefits your people, and doing so in a way that stands up to international financial institutions that benefit, certain big corporations based in the West, I guess I'm a nationalist. But I don't think that that's a fair dichotomy, because China is creating a new form of globalism. What they're doing with the One Belt and One Road, that is globalism. They're trying to build a global economy, but they're doing it in a much better way. They're going to developing countries where they're building hospitals, building schools, building infrastructure, and they're deepening international business ties, but they're doing it in a way that doesn't make the countries poorer. It actually benefits the countries economically. So, being anti-globalist is not correct, because there's going to be a global economy, but we can be against imperialism, which is capitalist globalization, or the global system of monopoly capitalism. And being nationalist isn't exactly right, because it's not a question of being nationalist. It's a question of fighting for the working class and protecting people. And, in Venezuela, Nicaragua, Russia, they got no problem with the Belt and Road, but they do have a problem with the IMF and the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. So it's kind of like this liberal democracy versus authoritarianism debate. This is kind of a false dichotomy. And it's the way that the Western imperialists like to frame these conversations. And they make it about that. Because, of course, do you want a society that's more authoritarian? Do you want to have more freedom? I want more freedom. Don't you want freedom? Oh, well, then I guess we have to agree with the imperialists. Now, do you think that countries are going to be able to just completely isolate? No. You want to be able to buy computers that are made in other countries. And so, it's like, so they win. If they frame it that way, it's a way of framing the argument where they always win. So I don't agree. So there you go. What's the next question?
Your take on the book on Karl Marx and the Close of His System by Eugene von Bauer.
This is one of those, I've never heard of Eugene von Bauer. I have never heard of him. So I have no idea.
Okay, well, moving on then.
Yes.
Would you do a William Z. Foster audiobook?
If I had the time, I mean, if I had the time, I might, but I mean, I have other things to do, like doing these streams and writing my own books and stuff, but I wouldn't be opposed to it. I mean, I would love to see more of William C. Foster's books available on audiobook. Sophia and was it Sophia and what's the other guy's name? They did, the introduction and chapter 1 of my BreadTube book as audiobooks, and they're already out there. And then Charlotte, she did my entire Kamala Harris book as an audiobook. And if fans want to step up to the plate and do that, that's awesome. And don't just do it for my works, do it for William Z. Foster, do it for Gus Hall. We need, a lot of people listen to books, right? For one, I cannot read fiction. I have to listen to fiction because my mind wanders. I can read nonfiction, but if it's fiction, I have to listen to it as an audiobook, right? Because in order to hold my attention, I need to hear it as an audiobook. I'm more of an audio guy. I write like I talk. That's why I make. What's the kind of typo where it's like the word sounds the same, but it's spelled differently? I make that typo loads, right? I use the wrong there. I use the wrong to because I'm not thinking. I'm writing as I talk, right? So I'm a more audio kind of guy. So there you go.
Next question.
Yes.
All right. Could the economic difficulties from sanctions cause the KPRF to take power in Russia?
I don't know. Politics in Russia is definitely going to be impacted by these events, and it already has. I mean, look, Russia, many people have commented that Putin seems to have two sides. On the one hand, he is like, he's Russian and he's, drawing from Russia's heritage and all that. On the other hand, there's an aspect of Putin where he wants to be more Western, and he wants Russia to be more like Norway or Sweden or a Western European country. And on the other hand, some people see him as vehemently anti-Western, and Putin kind of goes back and forth. But with these sanctions that are being imposed on Russia, this is forcing Russia to get closer to China economically. It's forcing Russia to nationalize various industries. A lot of the companies that are being pulled out are being nationalized. And so Russia is going to move in a more anti-imperialist and more socialistic direction. That's inevitable. Now, does that lead to the Communist Party taking power again? I don't know. Jeff Munson, is an American fighter, right? What is it? Mixed martial arts, I believe. Jeff Munson, an American fighter. He moved to Russia, and he joined the Communist Party. And he was very frustrated with the Communist Party. He felt like the Communist Party of the Russian Federation had big problems. So now he's a member of United Russia. He went to Russia, joined the Communist Party, got frustrated. Now he's in another party. And, Don Quarter, my good friend, he's in Russia. He's done a lot of interviews with people in the Russian Communist Party and also in the other party, the Communists of Russia Party, which is like another communist party in Russia. It's quite a bit smaller than the Russian Communist Party. And there are a lot of communist groups in Russia, let me just add, that have no relevance whatsoever. In the United States, we got a million communist parties that don't mean jack shit, right? But in Russia, the Communist Party is like a real party. They get like 10 to 15% of the vote in elections.
Even more recently.
Yeah, and they have seats in the government. That's like a real political party, okay? And the Communists of Russia, they have a couple seats. So they are like, they're not as big as the Communist Party. But then there's also a million tiny little irrelevant sects that don't matter. The Communist Workers' Party of Russia. It's like people say, well, the Communist Workers' Party of Russia said this. It's like, okay, well, that's 3 people in a room. I don't care. And it's like, oh, the Russian Trotskyite Fourth International. It's like, that's 2 people. I don't care. So, you have to keep that in mind. And I've started to think like that because I aspire, and that's been my problem, is American communist groups, they're all like these irrelevant communist groups in Russia. I have studied what groups that matter, like the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, like the Socialist Unity Center of India, like the Communist Party of India Marxist. CPI is intended to sound like communist groups that matter in other countries, not irrelevant sects. In the United States, other than like DSA, all we have are irrelevant sects. And DSA is basically a Democratic Party campaigning operation. But for the most part, any Marxist, leftist, socialist group in the United States is an irrelevant sect. It doesn't matter. And because of that, trying to appease them doesn't really matter. But, is this crisis going to lead to the Communist Party coming back to power? I don't think so. Let me just put it that way. I think it will lead to Russia becoming more socialistic. I think it'll lead to stronger pride in Russia's Soviet heritage. I believe it will lead to Russia being further economically isolated from the West and having more state control over its economy. But will it lead to the Communist Party becoming the ruling party? I don't think so. And I'll say that based on what I've seen in the interviews that Don has done on his channel about the Communist Party and some of their problems and all of that. You have to remember the Communist Party, I mean, not this part, not the KPRF, but the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was in power for many decades, right? And, you know, and the Soviet Union's never going to come back, right? And I think that there are a lot of people in Russia that say, okay, I'm proud of the Soviet history and all that, but I don't want the Soviet Union to come back. The Soviet Union collapsed for a reason. And I think that, you know, that's why Zhuganov never could win an election, was because he was basically, people saw him, regardless of what he said, they saw him as the candidate who wanted to restore the Soviet Union. Soviet Union's not going to come back. And, you know, Putin, one of the things that he said that has made him very popular, and then we'll move to the next question. One of the things that Putin has said that's made him very popular is he said, whoever does not mourn the loss of the Soviet Union has no heart. But he also said, whoever wants to restore the Soviet Union has no brain. And that's kind of a bold, you know, it's kind of a bold statement to make, but there's an element of truth in that. Putin's not trying to restore the Soviet Union right now with this thing, and that the Soviet Union is not going to come back. Russia will move in a more anti-imperialist and socialist direction. Pride in the Soviet history will definitely increase, but the Soviet Union's not going to come back.
Next question.
All right.
Where can I find an alternative perspective on Russia's activities in Ukraine?
Well, you can't find it on YouTube unless you listen to me. I mean, RT is banned from YouTube, but go to Rumble and watch RT on Rumble. Go to RT.com and you can get the Rumble stream. You can watch it on Rumble. You can watch it on Rockfin. Listen to Jackson Hinkle on Rockfin. Listen to Jimmy Dore. Listen to Max Blumenthal. You know, that's where you can find an alternative perspective. But yeah, I mean, they've banned RT so many places. And isn't that confirmation that they're lying? I mean, why are they so afraid of the pro-Russian viewpoint being out there? I mean, what are they so scared of? If we're so wrong, right? Why are they so afraid of us? You know, I mean, if anything, right? If they really were so confident in their position, they would want us out there to show how wrong we are, and they would use us as an example. But they're so determined to silence us, to blast us off of social media, shows that they're wrong. But Rumble has been a good outlet. Rumble and Rockfin. Those are
Odyssey as well.
Odyssey. We're on Rockfin right now. Go and sign up on Rockfin. I don't know how much longer this YouTube channel is going to last, folks. I'm just saying. Now, I am definitely not leaving voluntarily. I'm going to fight to be on this platform as long as I possibly can. But don't know how much longer it's going to be here. So Rockfin is where I'm staying. And I'm on Odyssey too. I'm on Odyssey. That's true. You know, it's not live on Odyssey. We're not streaming, but it'll be like automatically uploaded afterwards. So I'm on Odyssey. I'm on Rockfin. We're on Rockfin right now. So there you go. Next question.
Well, just a few more left. Why did Putin let Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania join NATO?
Why did he let them? I mean, they're independent countries. He did not have that sovereignty. They weren't happy about it when they did. But you have to remember also that that Ukraine has a virulently anti-Russian government that is tearing down World War II memorials. Now, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, these are countries that while there might be differences and while they may be closer to the United States, they may be members of NATO. It's not like they didn't come to power in a vicious coup and start tearing down the World War II memorials and start persecuting and bombing the Russian-speaking peoples of their region. That's not what happened, right? That first of all, they're independent countries. So in theory, Russia doesn't have the right to tell them, right? In theory, but Russia would obviously feel threatened. And Russia does feel threatened about NATO expanding to those countries. And they have voiced that concern. But on top of that, the context of them joining NATO was not an ugly coup where people got burned alive in the House of Trade Unions. It was a little bit different, right? So it's a little bit different. All right, next question.
How would you bring more academically oriented Marxists to Marxism-Leninism?
Well, look, for me, it just seemed like a no-brainer because my whole life I was told communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. Never worked, right? Communism just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And, when I discovered basic economic data that it did, I thought, okay, well, then I have to obviously embrace the kind of communism that did work. But that said, at the same time, the Soviet Union is not coming back, right? Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, these countries want to be more like China. And so as much as I'm all for studying Marxism-Leninism, and I draw most heavily from Marxism-Leninism, I encourage people to study Baathism, Baathist Arab socialism. I encourage people to study, we published our own edition of The Green Book by Gaddafi, not a Marxist, but a socialist and an anti-imperialist aligned with the communist countries. I encourage people to study Christian socialism. I encourage people to study Bolivarian socialism, which is not ML. I mean, you live in Nicaragua, and it's not ML. I mean, right? I mean, Sandinistas, they're not MLs.
There's some, similarities, but no.
Yeah,
Sandinistas don't identify as Marxist-Leninists.
Yeah, they draw from it. They know it very well, but it's their own kind of unique tradition. And, that's what I encourage people to do. I don't want people to become dogmatic MLs. But Lenin's book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, is one of the most important books published in world history. If you want to understand how the world economy works, you got to read that. And I actually made this argument when I was in college because I took political science. And I remember I brought Lenin's book, The State and Revolution, and I held it up and I said, at one point, 2/3 of humanity lived under governments whose constitutions explicitly referenced Marxism, Leninism, i.e. the theory of government in this book. So if there's any book you should read when you're studying politics, especially global politics, you want to understand global political systems, you should read The State and Revolution by Lenin. That is the theory of the state that China is based on, that a number of African countries, their constitutions were based on, that a number of, the Cuba is based on, that, the North Korea is based on, that, South Yemen for a long time. I mean, many, many countries in the world, their theory of government is based on the writing in that book. So why would you not read that at the college level? But it was never assigned to me. It was assigned to me in a philosophy class once, but it was never assigned to me in political science. Well, that should be like basic. So, Marxism, Leninism, study Marxism, Leninism, learn Marxism, Leninism, do it. But the attitude that I have toward all revolutionary movements, all anti-imperialists, is study all of them, but blindly follow none of them, but constantly be trying to figure out a way that we can figure out a model that will work in this country. That's what we need to do. We need to find a formula for winning socialism in the United States.
Very wise.
All right.
Last question. Why do you think Zelensky pushes for a no-fly zone?
Because the goal of this conflict on the part of Zelensky, who's just a puppet of the United States, is not to bring peace to Ukraine. He doesn't care about the Ukrainians who are dying right now. He doesn't. He doesn't want to bring peace to Ukraine. His job is to fight Russia. And he is basically just a puppet. And his goal is to keep this conflict going as long as possible and to fight Russia. And I see that last super chat there.
Yeah, we got one more in.
I have read it. The Last Soviet Republic by Stuart Parker. I have read it. It's a great book about Belarus and their history and Alexander Lukashenko, etc. It's a tremendous book, and I do recommend it.
Might have to check that one out.
Yeah, I have it. It's a great book. I think I gave away one copy, and so I have another one. It's a tremendous book. All right, so we're going to show the sign-off video, and then we're going to be done. Sounds good?
Great.
All right. In the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, folks. Good night.